Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca. I am joined today yet again by my favorite interim co-host. I don't even know if I can call you an interim co-host anymore. One of my many co-hosts, unoriginal
Yes,
Jim. How are you today?
doing really good. It's cold, but I'm in my basement and we're starting to put Christmas up.
Oh,
So,
that's so
because I'm that
fun.
person. Like the
Yep.
second you get past Halloween, it's like my
Yep.
Christmas village has to come out. So,
You know what? You have to, though. It's such an effort to put everything up. You have to like maximize it to every single second that you can possibly have it up.
yep,
So
yep.
I applaud you for not doing it before Halloween. I have seen this. So
So I struggle, right? But I kind of like the spooky month thing, right? And I
yeah, I
have
do too.
I have these villages. My kids make fun of me because I have villages, and I have an entire Halloween village. And this year I had all the Halloween village out, and then I bought a bunch of skeletons and mummies and had them fight each other.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, I'm that person. So
That's
I'm
awesome.
cheap.
No, you're my kind of Halloween guy. I love that. Yeah, my porch used to be, I mean, not so much now that my kids are older, it makes a difference when you realize, okay, now I'm just doing it for myself. But boy, my porch used to be full of decorations. You couldn't even get through to get to the candy. But then I also love Thanksgiving, that gets
Yeah.
overlooked, but Thanksgiving decorations are really nice too. So, yes, everybody, this podcast today is about home decor with Rebecca and
That's
unoriginal
right.
Jim. It's
We're gonna
not
talk about your local home store.
it's not. It's actually about a different topic altogether. And I'm again out of town. Probably by the time this airs, I will be back. That's why I have this strange hotel curtain backdrop. And I appreciate Jim jumping on because our time zones are completely different. I'm on the other side of the world. So we're going to make this work. It's going to happen. I actually did the newscast last night, Jim, at 2 o'clock in the morning for me. I was
Meanwhile,
like,
Bill and RFM are like, "Oh, we're
yeah,
gonna go to sleep after this."
exactly. And I was like, okay, how much longer is your story or your segment? So yeah, it was an interesting experience. But no, and that newscast actually even relates a little bit to what we're going to talk today because something happened on that feeds directly into this. So we're going to talk about orthodoxy in Mormonism. This is a broad topic and it's being brought up more and more. There was an excellent article in the Salt Lake Tribune that we're kind of going to frame our conversation around. So, the question that we're going to explore today is just how orthodox is the typical member of the LDS church? And is that changing? And do you recognize these pictures here on the screen, Jim? Do you know who these are?
This would be that show that I have never seen. This is
Look at you.
the what Secret Lives of Mormon Wives?
Yep.
Is that it?
Yep, the
Yeah.
top is The
Which
Secret
is
Lives of Mormon Wives, which a
so,
new season has just dropped.
and the
And
bottom
the
one would
bottom
be
one,
I don't know the bottom one.
The Real Housewives of Salt Lake.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And
What's
it's
her name?
so,
Heather something
uh-huh.
is
Yep,
part of that
Heather
group,
Gay.
right?
And that is another thing that will have dropped by the time this airs. Surviving Mormonism is a three-part series on Bravo where they talk to people about their Mormon stories as far as, experiences within the church. So, and it's interesting because both of these programs and the Surviving Mormonism, they received a lot of pushback in the faithful community from people saying, well, those aren't Mormons. Those don't represent Mormons. I don't know any Mormons like that. And that's so fascinating to me. I was going to tell you what happened on the newscast last night. I was kind of giving a little preview, reminding everybody, hey, these shows are coming out, Secret Lives. And somebody in the chat, which I can see as an ongoing chat on the side, said, those aren't real Mormons. Those were never Mormons. Those aren't Mormons. And I actually had to even break the fourth wall there on the newscast and say, I'd like to address someone in the chat and say, these are Mormons. If you watch this show, there are baby blessings. They go to sacrament meeting. Several of them are wearing garments. They talk about, at one point on one episode, all the women sat together at dinner and recited the young women's theme. It freaked everybody in the larger world out because they were like,
Yeah.
what is happening? What is this recitation? So these women were Mormon and still identify as Mormon. We're going to talk in this episode about cultural Mormonism, which is something that Jim has even written in, entire blog posts and things on. So I think this is going to be fascinating and I'm going to be really excited to see the comments from everybody. I think we could start out if we go to our next slide. Jim is running the slides today because, I hate to run. I love people that bring me slides, but I hate to run slides. So here's your typical 1950s family, right? Mom baking, dad dressed up from work, kids adoring. And I feel like LDS culture for a long time, and probably even still, is kind of rooted in that, right? Even the attire, the 1950s business attire, for the men and everything. So I wanted to kind of talk about each of our families and see, just even I always say you get a room full of Mormons and everybody is so different. Even two people who said, I grew up Mormon, that means something completely different. I've talked about Orthodoxy in my family. I don't need to go into all the details. I've told these stories over and over. But on the Orthodoxy spectrum, I was raised at the very end, the food storage, the homemade clothes, the gardening. Not polygamist, but definitely that was something, a specter in my house. I knew that was my heritage. Pictures of polygamous ancestors, understood that was my future in the next life. It was a big part of it. And, no shopping on Sunday, no drinking of even herbal tea, no this and this and no and no. In fact, my upbringing was so orthodox that I often have people when I podcast say, you're lying or you're making that up. I am not making that up. I lived in this kind of little pod of sort of orthodoxy. And of course, this was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And generationally, that makes a difference too. So that was my upbringing. But you're younger than I am, and you had a different experience. So where would
So
you
it
put
was
your
it
family
was
on the orthodoxy scale?
it was different, but I think that there's a lot of commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm born in 1981. Okay, so when I was coming up, they were coming out of coming out of the Satanic Panic, coming out of
Mm-hmm.
Kimball, into Benson. Okay. So I grew up in a very, very conservative Mormon environment that the full patriotic American rebranding had really taken hold by the 1970s. And so that was the household and the family dynamic I was in. It was very much a rush baby growing up. Um, but, religion was discussed commonly and openly at every single family event. You could not have a family event without an aunt or an uncle having conversations about religion. The concept of the church being the beacon of the right was absolutely there. It was everything could be tied back and viewed through a lens within Mormonism. So if you were looking at politics, you would take that politics and say, well, where does this meet scripture? Or what has the prophet said
Exactly.
that would back this up? And so everything you looked at, and this is how I viewed the world until I was in my late 30s, right? And I wrote a book, and at the beginning of the book, the entire first section is about how you have to view the world through the lens of the gospel, or else you're not righteous. Maybe I'll take a second, go grab a copy, and read that
Oh,
because
grab the coffee. No, I
I've
think
got
that
it.
would be great. I love it when we
Um,
have a guest that says, I wrote a book when I was faithful. It's just so
yeah,
fascinating to me that these things are all out there. RFM has so much content, from his faithful days. It's really an interesting lens to look
I
at things
might
through.
have a
Yeah,
copy
go
right.
grab it. See if you can find it. I'll just keep talking and entertaining myself because I hate
Yeah,
to
give me
edit.
1 second.
So yeah, go ahead. So anyway, now we can talk about Jim, everybody, while he's gone. So, but it is interesting to me. I mean, remember California Mormons, right? Once I got to college, I had roommates that had been raised Mormon, considering themselves full on LDS, but they had very different experiences. Going to brunch after church, some of my California roommates would do that. I couldn't even fathom that. I wasn't even allowed to go to the store on Sunday for like an emergency feminine hygiene product purchase, that kind of thing. So I think once you kind of go to college, meet other Mormons from other areas, you start realizing there's this whole spectrum. There's this broad arena of what it means to be Mormon, and heaven forbid dating, right? Like you can say, I'm a Mormon, you're a Mormon, let's get married. Once you get married and start really understanding each other, you could be so far apart on the spectrum of Mormonism that there can be big
Correct.
problems. So that's maybe a whole other podcast. Did you find your book, Jim?
I did. And
Good.
this is from the introduction.
Oh, hold the
And
book
it
up. Let's
says,
see it. Let's see what it is. Oh, look at
yep,
that.
it was published by actually Rod Meldrum and I had the same
Oh my
publisher.
God. Okay, we're turning off the podcast now.
Yeah. Uh, let's see here. So it says this is okay. So this is actually perfectly ties in. It says there are currently those who label themselves as liberal Mormons, Mormon feminists, progressive Mormons, and this list goes on and on. The one thing that they all have in common is not the gospel at all. The one thing that they all have in common is error. While there may be elements of truth in the multitude of temporal thoughts on the political right or left, not one of these philosophies is wholly compatible with the restored gospel, specifically because each was developed without the power of the priesthood.
Wow.
Okay. Um, let's see here. Yeah, and so
Boy,
that I mean that's it. The whole section is about how
yeah.
nobody's right unless you view everything through the lens of the gospel. And that was how I viewed orthodoxy, right? It was you look at the world and this is how I was raised. You look at the world and you say, where do the prophets stand? And then Mormonism is a buffet. So you could literally go and pick a comment from a general authority that matches what you want. And that's your definition of orthodoxy. For me, it was Benson, it was Kimball, it was
Yeah.
Clark. It was everybody that was on the farthest right side of that spectrum that you could possibly get. And then when somebody would retort and say, hold on a second, James E. Faust was a Democrat, you go,
Hmm.
he wasn't really a Democrat, right? I mean,
Exactly.
he
Exactly.
wasn't really. So you would then use what you understood for your orthodoxy to discount what somebody else was building up as theirs. And then you would meet somebody who, like you say, you got these different positions. And I once ran into somebody at a gas station in Spanish Fork who was from a polygamous family. He was an active member, but he was still very much engaged in the ideas of polygamy. And my immediate response is that guy's not Orthodox either. He doesn't know what
Mhm.
he's talking about, blah, 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 right? So, Orthodoxy for me and the family I grew up in was conservative. It was immediately receptive to whatever the church was teaching at that point in time. It was very akin to public displays of piety, so no shopping on Sundays. When I got caught drinking cappuccino, oh my God, the world was going to end. I had cousins who would wear their Sunday best all day. They would
Yeah.
go home and they could not take off
Yeah, that was
their
me.
yeah.
Yep. All day
Um,
Sunday,
you know,
senior Sunday clothes. Yep.
yeah, and so it was, and then it was very hardline. Anything that deviated from the Western traditional concept of marriage or morality was immorality, and it was very dismissive of other cultures. And I had the same run-in with a family member of mine last Thanksgiving about how they're talking about other Christians, like, well, they just love to violate the Sabbath, don't they? And I'm like, hold on, in their tradition, they're not violating the Sabbath.
Right.
You are prejudiced against them because you say that they are,
Yep.
but it doesn't mean that they are. But that was that attitude, very dismissive. And like you, I grew up in an age where we still made fun of other churches for
Yes.
not being Mormon, right?
Yes.
It was, that we would still use the term abomination to describe
Yep.
other churches. We would still use the argument that they had some truth, but not all the truth. We
Yep.
were the true church. When we were missionaries, you were told you are to go out into the world to teach and not be taught. And so they would shut the door against any kind of critical thought. You are there to deliver this specific message. So that was very hard line. If you didn't live it, it's kind of hard to explain it, right? But what you've got here, right? This very traditional Norman Rockwell proclamation on the family image here. That was the image of the family in the 1980s and even in the 1990s. This image did not start to change in the church until they hit a wall and had to start including women in conference. So what was it,
Hmm.
2013 when women could first pray in conference? Was the 1990s before women could actually pray in church, right? So this image was the image through the 1980s into the 1990s, and then the church has to start rebranding after the 1990s, starting with the temple ceremony. And I think that that's where the cracks in orthodoxy begin. They begin when the church lost control of the narrative, and I think we're
Yes.
going to get into that.
Yeah, no, we are. And I think they lost control of the demographic. The church's demographic does not at all fit this anymore. And they
Right.
tried for a long time, those growing pains to make it fit. I think now they've said, okay, it doesn't fit. We're going to have to do some other things. And I think that begins with changing the way that they view women's roles. I just learned the other day that they're going to be releasing a series of Eliza R. Snow, Smith Young's sermons into the gospel library. I mean, isn't that interesting? Trying to give a woman, trying to prop up sort of a woman and give her some kind of authority or importance with the words that she spoke, because I think they realize that women are looking, desperately searching, for some kind of role
So
model like that. I thought that was fascinating.
without getting too far astray,
Yeah, it's hard.
absolutely have to, because people now are aware of what the correlation movement did to the
Yes.
Relief Society.
Yeah.
And more women are sitting there thinking, well, why did that happen? And the argument that it was brought under priesthood control to control the narratives, that doesn't fly anymore.
Yeah.
They're desperate to make it fly, but the church desperately has to do something to give women some sort of voice because right now, as I said on a TikTok a while back, they have absolutely no standing. We tell them, yes, you have authority, but the authority only comes if a man tells you you have authority. And if your entire existence in the church is predicated, or your ability to make a decision, your ability to create a cause or lead anything is based entirely upon the discretion of a man saying, yes, you can do this, then you don't have authority. You have delegated responsibility.
That's a
Women in the
great way to
church
put it.
have delegated responsibility, not authority. And that even extends to missionaries. Missionaries have no authority. They can teach, they can testify, but anything that requires any sort of practice or organization falls right back to men. So they're releasing Eliza R. Snow because she, one, an ultimate apologist for the polygamist history of the church.
Yes.
There is no better apologist. And so when you're trying to get rid of the polygamy deniers, they are putting Eliza R. Snow's information out there because she was the vocal proponent,
Yep.
going all the way back to Joseph Smith. So that is another level of damage control on the anti-polygamy side. So I don't want to get too far astray what we're talking about, but you made me think about that.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating. And I guarantee they won't say Smith Young. Most people, I would say most people don't know that she was married to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. So there
Yeah.
you go, your Orthodox Mormon. But that was the Orthodox Mormon of the day, right? It's a perfect example. That is not the Orthodox Mormon. In fact, that's the exact polar opposite of the Orthodox Mormon today. So the article, there are so many different tangents here. I know you'll have to excuse us if we, kind of talk where our thoughts take us. But the article that I want to frame all this in, it was excellent. It was actually over a month ago by Tamara Kemsley. She does some good writing there at the Tribune. And the article was called Active Latter-day Saints Increasingly Abandoning Orthodox Views. And we're just going to go through this. There was some really interesting data and some charts, and we're just going to kind of talk about what this means. I'll read this first one. It starts out by saying, ask Latter-day Saints, even regular churchgoers, if theirs is the one true faith leading to eternal life, and there's a decent chance they will say no. Isn't that interesting? That is due to a growing number of active U.S. members holding less than orthodox views. And you had just touched on that, Jim. When we grew up, we were the one. It was it. We had that smug knowledge, sitting there amongst our friends that we were the one. They're not going to say that anymore. Things have pivoted and shifted in a huge way. Such is the tentative conclusion data scientist Alex Bass reached in his recently published study, Mormon Typology Report of 2025. And that's what this article is based on. So but I love the way that starts because, to say no, that would have been heresy, even maybe 20 years ago. But
Yeah,
now,
well, even
you don't say yes,
yeah.
you say,
So I had this structure in my head all growing up, and it's one of the things that we were taught. We were taught that America was founded to allow the freedom to give
yes,
Joseph Smith the opportunity to start the church, and then the narrative is that as the world fell apart, right, the Constitution hangs by a thread, blah 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 blah. That Mormonism would be Zion, and that people from all over would flee to Zion, and that would lead to people coming to the church. Okay. And so the idea of us being true wasn't just a concept that we were the way people got to heaven because we had the ordinances and the temple and everything else. It was because we were the structure that would survive the
right.
downfall of everything.
Yep,
And once you dig into it a little bit, you realize that this logic is rooted in the Council of 50, right?
it
This
is.
is this was Joseph Smith and Brigham Young's understanding of how the great theocracy of Mormonism would come about by the U.S. government failing and people coming to
Yep,
the church. But our understanding is that we had all been held back to these days because of the restoration of all things, and that made us the true church because we had the same gospel that was taught in Christ's day, same church that goes back to the same thing Abraham had. Don't even get me started on the misunderstandings of Abraham or the early Christian church.
that's too big of a
Uh,
tangent to tackle.
right. But then we also tie everything we taught in terms of us being the true church back to Adam.
Yes,
Adam, our church is not new. It starts with Adam.
right.
Everybody else's churches, that comes from the Reformation. We demean the Council of Nicaea. Um, Bruce R. McConkie talks about how the Catholic Church is the great and abominable church. Anti-Catholicism shows up in the Book of Mormon. And so you get these attitudes where even Christ, coming to Joseph Smith, says, all the creeds are abomination to me.
Exactly.
So based upon Joseph Smith's first interaction with deity, it sets the standard where we understand ourselves as the only true church. For young people now to say no, or to
Yeah.
say that might not be true,
Yeah. Or I don't
means
think
that,
so. Right.
yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I think what you just described is what Tim Ballard and Elder Ballard were promoting over the last few years, right?
Yeah.
And in Deseret Book, all those books about, the Constitution and the Revolution, and it was all for Mormonism. All of
Yep.
it was a direct line to Mormonism, and we were going to save the world. We were the world, and nobody's really on board with that anymore, except for maybe on that scale of orthodoxy somebody that, like my parents, they're deceased, but they believe that to their dying day, that that's exactly what was still happening, where their grandchildren, although active in the church, would have said, I don't really know much about that. So that is an interesting concept. It all fits in together. But yeah, why don't you go ahead and read this next
Yep.
one, and we'll start really diving into the data. But it just, even I feel like one last little point before you read it, and I'm trying to remember which apostle this was, but even an apostle was asked, and this was reported in the church news, so you talk to God, or so you're an apostle of God. And he's like, well, that's what they say. He said something very vague. They're not like the apostles of our day, where there was hellfire. And they said, well, I'm walking with Jesus in the temple. I'm talking to him. We believe that. That's orthodoxy. That doesn't happen anymore. They're witnesses for
Well,
the name of Jesus Christ.
and there
It's
was
all just sort of watered down, and it's not at all the orthodoxy that we were raised with.
there was all this mitigation around the idea of the brethren seeing Christ too,
Mm-hmm.
because like I remember Holland would speak and we would be watching conference and my mom would come away and she would say he has seen Christ. He knows something.
Yep.
And so when an apostle would say something that was highly critical of the current cultural situation, when they would issue a cultural criticism,
Yep.
the reaction on behalf of members is Christ said something,
Yeah.
right? And then, there were all these stories around apostles seeing Christ in the temple and the Holy of
Yep.
Holies. Those narratives were always there. What the church is doing now, and it's really interesting because it ties into this, is they're mitigating that. You're
Mm-hmm.
right. They're no longer apostles. It's no longer I bear witness because I think you can't bear witness to something you haven't seen,
Yeah.
right? You can't go to court and say, did you see John hit somebody with a car? Well, I heard that it happened,
Yeah.
or I read about it and I bear
Feel that it
witness that I read
happened.
about
Yeah.
it happening.
I had a
So,
dream that it happened. I
right.
saw it with my spiritual eyes. Yeah, that doesn't fly
Yeah.
anymore, I think
But
is what I'm trying
now
to
it's
say.
witnesses to his name.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing. And so they're mitigating that. And I think that the way that they mitigate that by changing the language, by becoming witnesses to the name of Christ, that doesn't actually mean anything.
Right.
But
It doesn't mean anything.
that act of diminishing their title feeds this kind of doubt on behalf of younger members, right? How can you be sure that your church is the only true church when you have watched the language change from apostle and witness and spokesman of Christ to witness to the name of somebody? It's nonsense. I'll go
It's
ahead and read this
nonsense.
real fast.
All right, let's do it.
Based on data he mined from the Religious Landscape Studies from the Pew Research Center, the paper examines responses from nearly 2,000 self-identified members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Mormons. The survey and BAS both use Latter-day Saints and Mormon terms. This approach meant that people who had once been members but no longer considered themselves a part of the Utah-based faith were unlikely to appear in the results.
That's
Meaning
important to
that,
know that these
yeah,
are self-reporting, calling themselves active. I am an active member,
yeah.
because that's the different, that's the problem with Secret Lives and Real Housewives are saying they're not active. They're exmo. This survey are people who sit down in the seats in the pew and say, I am a member, self-reported, of
Yeah.
the church.
And took the time to fill out the study too,
Yes.
right? So from their responses collected over nearly 20 years, he concluded that the people in the pews are not the same as a generation ago.
Yep.
This is absolutely true.
Yep.
You can see it with just the division between my grandparents
Mm-hmm.
and my generation and my cousins. They were very hardline, and I think of the most of my cousins were probably 60-40, 60 out of the church, 40% in the church, right? Um, Simply put, he explains, what was once a faith defined by overwhelming uniformity, where the majority of members could be described as devout, orthodox, and politically conservative, may have fractured into a more complex spectrum of identities. So I want to talk about that real fast.
Yeah, absolutely.
The orthodoxy and devoutness. I did a TikTok just I think yesterday where I was talking about the language and how the language we use in the church it's coded. Okay. So the way we speak, the way the general authorities identify people, I was talking about the think celestial speech.
Yeah.
Okay. And how his language of don't take counsel from those who don't believe created a firewall, a bulwark by which people could judge people in the out group and in the in group. And the church has been doing this quite a bit recently, where the idea of turning to approved sources, approved people, casting dispersion on doubt on people within your own family means that what they're actively trying to do, they're trying to mitigate this kind of fracturing by getting the people who are devout and are orthodox not to engage or take seriously people within their own family. And the idea is don't engage with people who don't believe, because by engaging your belief is at risk. Okay. And that's I think a huge part of this, because they recognize that you have people who are on these different levels of faith. And if the Orthodox who raise their kids as Orthodox, who pay tithing as Orthodox, what was his name? The head of the Utah area presidency. Oh, what's his name? Oh, he's super Orthodoxy. Um,
That narrows it down.
yeah. The head of the Utah area in the LDS church gave a speech where he broke people down by their likelihood to stay in the church and pay tithing. Okay. I will have to find the clip. But if you can get the people who are devout, who are Orthodox, to stay within a silo, then
Hmm.
you can stem a lot of these problems. Yeah, they're going to lose a few kids here and there, but the tithing base and the people are going to be there. So I think that the way that the language is coming across in conferences now reflects these changes.
Yeah, and I think it's to maintain and retain uniformity, as it says here
Yes.
in that art. You have to have that. And I've always said that if my parents were to have attended a regular sacrament meeting, they were in assisted living, and just talk naturally about their view of the church or the things that they knew to be true, they probably would have been escorted out as preaching heresy, right? Almost everything that they would say,
Well,
they were 80s Mormons, 60s, 70s,
there's
80s
that
Mormons.
there's
It had
that
changed and they did not recognize that.
well, there's that quote from Oakes where he's sitting in front and he's kind of old and he says, "The Lord did not say that his people would be diverse." And he pauses. He goes, "He says that they will be one." Like that's huge thing.
Interesting.
But yeah, so they do preach that, and they have to
Right.
have this idea of uniformity. So I'll read this next one too. Of all the statistical efforts to examine faith in America, few are as rigorous and respected as Pew Religious Landscape Study. The nationally representative questionnaire of U.S. adults has occurred in three waves to date: 2007, 2014, 2023, and 24. This has included a total of 1,810 identified Latter-day Saints. Harvesting their responses to a wide-ranging questions, Bass employed a mathematical algorithm to sort individuals with similar answer patterns. The approach yielded four Mormon typologies: devout traditionalists, adaptive believers, cultural Mormons, and in-betweeners.
Yeah, this is what makes this article so interesting is they really have drilled down on the different types of Mormons that exist. And we talk about this all the time when we're podcasting. We all, we say, all of us say, wow, you're sitting at church, next to you is a polygamy denier. On the other side of you is a reform Mormon who believes in crystals, energy healing, and mother in heaven. Then behind you is an Orthodox person who, wants the traditional trad wife, stay-at-home family. But everybody's there. They're all worshiping in a Mormon context. Their butt is in the seat. They're paying their tithing. but they're so widely different. And
What,
and
what
what keeps them all together, I think that they don't share their actual views, they try to find some commonality.
what keeps them all together is that they have an understood dependence on the authority structure of
That's
the
it.
church.
That's it. Very
Okay?
well
The
said.
church has done such a good job of saying, yeah, you can believe these things amongst yourselves,
Mhm.
but you need us. You have to have the keys of power and authority that's vested in the priesthood. So by creating a structure wherewith members have to meet a certain loyalty test, a certain litmus test, okay, to gain access to the rituals and rites which they have been taught to believe
Right.
will help them keep their loved ones. Without these things, you lose your
Yep.
loved ones. The church
And
has done a
every
very
one of
good
these
job.
groups believes that. That's the
Every
common
single
thing.
one
They
of them
may
does.
have these widely differing views, but they all believe they need those ordinances, the power to be with their families forever. And that keeps
Yes.
everybody in
And
line.
so, in that way, the corporation has taken the love of family and held that hostage in a way that keeps people active and keeps them engaged and stops them from breaking out.
Yeah.
So,
No, you're
um,
absolutely 100% correct on that. And that's why people say, well, how come the church leadership doesn't come out and say, don't do this anymore. Don't believe in this or don't, they don't. They're very vague at the top about certain things because as long as you're within a certain parameter, you can believe in Mother in Heaven or your crystals or, whatever. You can, think this or that as long as you're still
yeah.
attending and kind of giving this appearance. It's a really interesting. I don't think it's sustainable forever,
Well,
honestly.
the one thing you can't do, the one thing you cannot do in the church is put forth a narrative that undermines the authority structure.
Yeah.
Speculative religion is part of Mormonism. Speculative theology is part of Mormonism, going back to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. It's why we don't use the Journal of Discourses because it's filled with speculative. Okay,
It is.
but what the church wants, it doesn't matter if you're a devout traditionalist or a cultural Mormon. You cannot speak out against the authority structure that gives the church power over the individual and choice.
Yep.
So a devout traditionalist then, right,
Yep.
wants the majority, but no more, avid religious practitioners who believe in God with certainty. Okay, so there's no doubt there. They trend to be older, more male, politically conservative. Tim Ballard,
Yep.
representative of roughly 25% of self-identified Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
Now,
So I
I
would
would
put my
go,
parents in that category. That's my, big example. A lot of my relatives, and you're right, skewing older, even older than me, right?
yeah,
Not so much a Gen Xer, but a baby boomer. The abs and what's funny is devout traditionalists dial it back 20 or 30 years, and that was just your average Mormon. That's what's
right.
so funny. They are now called, the old guard, the devout traditionalists, because time has marched on and
Yep.
progress
And
has
mind
been
you,
made.
these are the guys who are really, in my experience, these are the guys who are really, really, really into speculative theology. They're really into the intersection of conservative politics, the constitutionalists. These are
Mhm.
people like I would say, gosh, it's been so long since I've been in Utah. I
Yeah.
would say like Connor Boyack or someone like that,
Yeah. 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 Oh, no, he's
who
still around.
yeah, who infuses politics with
Yeah.
religion, and then what they do is they find political and religious meaning by melding
Yeah.
those two because it gives them power and authority, right? So that's what I view this group as. These are the guys
Yeah.
who read McConkie. These are the guys who read
Yeah.
Scout. These are the people who go to Sunday school and they get frustrated because there's not enough meat and the milk is water.
Exactly. And now that you
Um,
phrase it that way, there are younger people that have kind of rediscovered this. I think of the cavalry, the group
yeah,
that's kind of influencing missionaries. They're like that too. So there's a new
Ford
wave.
radio.
There's a new generation. Exactly. So I would say it skews much
Well,
older and then the younger generation. Some find this attractive, probably because they're rebelling against their parents like us that kind of got a little
yeah.
more relaxed.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder. I wonder. So you have your apologetics, right? What's his name? Insufferable.
Narrow it down, narrow it down. Oh, Jacob Hansen.
Yes, that's him.
Oh my God.
Um,
How embarrassing that you said the adjective insufferable, and that's what I said.
well,
I'm
I
sorry.
have been fighting the temptation because I see he pops up on my feed all the time. I've been fighting the temptation to uh, do TikToks responding to him.
Yeah.
But I know the second I hop on that treadmill of nonsense, I'm not going to be able to get off.
No, you can't.
No.
Yeah, don't do
But
it.
my point is these devout traditionalists, these younger people that are skewing into it, these are the people who I think are the apologists. And then you have your cultural Mormons who will tiptoe around the apologists until they get what they want to make them feel secure in their doubts. And then they pull back out of that
Exactly.
and try to give a little bit of nuance. So,
Yep, that's
um,
very good description. Okay, so we're going to go through the different groups and then we'll crunch some data as far as what they're doing now. So let's go to the next one. This is a adaptive believer, the most common type today. Attends church regularly, but are less consistent with prayer and scripture study. Unlike me, boy, I once counted on any given day, my family and add personal prayers. I prayed maybe like 9 times. Personal prayers, breakfast prayers, family prayers, prayer at lunchtime, prayer at any kind of church meeting you went to after school, dinner prayer, perhaps a family night prayer, then your personal prayer, we're looking at, up to 10 prayers a day. So
yep.
the adaptive believer is not doing that like I did when I was growing up. Roughly half believe the faith is one true church. I think that one true church thing, and we did an episode on that. I think it aired last week or the week before. But which would make it probably a month ago by the time this airs, but it's a litmus test. It really is. Do you believe it's the one true church? That says a lot about where you fit on the scale. This person, the adaptive believer, trends female and more educated, represents roughly 42% of identified Latter-day Saint Mormons. 42%. What was the devout traditional one? That was
25.
25. 42%. This is the largest group now in the LDS self-reported population, an adaptive believer. What do you think about this particular group, this demographic?
So I think this is where the majority, well, this is the population that struggles the most with faith crisis.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the second you take a step back and you say, okay, maybe the church narrative isn't everything I'm told it is. The second you are able to say to yourself, maybe this isn't the only true church, all of a sudden it's like a crack in a windshield,
Yeah.
right? And that's how it was with me, right? It's like, okay, if this is true, then this can't be true. Okay. And so I think these are the people, I think this is the group that the traditionalist church is afraid of. I think the general authorities are afraid of this particular body. Um, because one, the second the way the church is set up is that the females run the influence in the home, right? So if you have a mother who is an adaptive believer, who is empathetic to, their kids are going to bring home friends who are gay
Mm-hmm.
or who are bi. Hold on a second.
Mm-hmm.
Nope, Matt, I'll talk to you later. They're going to bring home people who the kids are going to associate with. These women have to find a way to either create relationships with their kids, and their kids are trending more non-traditional, or they're traditionalist husbands or fathers, right? And so they're in a very rough place. And also, these adaptive believers, if they trend female, these are the ones who are questioning their place, their role. And these are the ones that the church is trying to placate by saying, you have authority, you have priesthood, you have everything. You just can't exercise any of it because you have the wrong chromosomes.
Exactly. Here's this essay by Eliza R. Snow. Read it. See,
Yeah.
see?
So this
Exactly.
is the population that the church is desperate to maintain, and this is why they are trending. They're trying so hard to hype up women in the church and their roles and all that sort of stuff without actually giving them any authority, because of this.
Yeah.
If more than half, or if roughly half of the women in the church are able to say this is not the true church, that means when their kids decide that their faith journey is going to be different,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be okay with those kids taking a
Yep.
different faith journey. And all of a sudden, if the church isn't hemorrhaging youth already, adaptive believing parents who are not 100% certain on the truth of the church are going to let their kids go and be have a clean conscience about it.
Yeah, they're going to choose their children. And I have so many examples, and you probably know so many examples of
Mhm.
this too, where it's usually the mother that is more understanding of the child's individual journey. And then eventually, just because of the family dynamic, the father becomes on board, and then he becomes more adaptive in the way that he's thinking. And you're absolutely right. You see this play out over and over. And I think that that is concerning. And when you look at the different things, the decisions that are made at the top from leadership, and you put it in this framework, you can see that they are trying to, I don't know if combat is the right word, but they're trying to address this. This is what's right there at the heart of the church, and this is what's happening every day in every ward. So
Yeah.
fascinating. This is a
Well,
fascinating one.
one last thought, right? So when we were coming up, the narrative on truth was established by that section of Joseph Smith's vision where it's like all creeds are abomination
Yes.
before me. When was the last time you heard that quoted?
Yeah, they don't say that anymore. Yeah, that's
No.
why I did that episode on the one true church, because I said, are they dialing this back? When do you hear this? You don't, you might hear it from some random testimony from some old person. I know this is the one true church, but if they're trying to enter mainstream Christianity, they're not going
It can't
to
do it.
put that kind of doctrine in the forefront. We want to be a part of you guys. We're going to borrow all of your traditions, waving palms,
Your
good
language, the whole
Friday.
nine
Yeah,
yards.
wearing the cross,
No.
but we're going to borrow them that you've all been doing falsely for hundreds of years, but we're still the only one that has truth. Yeah. Everybody's wiggling out from under that. Everybody's very wishy-washy about it. And it's very interesting to see. So, all right. Do you want to take the next one, which is
Yep.
the cultural Mormon? You have a lot to say
Yeah.
on this one.
I do have a lot to
Great.
say about this because this ties very closely into my faith journey, right?
Yeah.
So, cultural Mormons, the lowest rates of religious participation across all measures, believing God and heaven, still view Mormonism as part of their cultural identity. Like adaptive believers, they appear to be experiencing meaningful proportional growth, roughly 27% of self-identified Latter-day Saints and Mormons. Okay. So let me give you my background on this term cultural Mormon, because this is one when I was very, 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 very orthodox, very aggressively apologetic. This made me mad. And I remember I had a roommate and his name was Chris, and he and I went to the Village Inn that used to be on, let's see, your South Temple on the road as you're going up to
Yeah.
the University of Utah. Okay, there was one right there on the corner just before you went up the
Oh,
hill.
yeah. I love their
And we went to
waffles.
go meet a friend of his, and he was like, "Oh, this guy's so good. He's cool. We're gonna go to church." And I walk in, and this kid had tattoos up his arms, and it was like the early 2000s, so everybody was into the whole music scene there in Utah. And I walked away, and I was like, "That guy's not actually. He doesn't actually believe anything. That's ridiculous." And then I saw, after I got married, there were these kids in Provo that had temple tattoos. Like one kid, like we're sitting at the Provo Town Center. I've got my kid. I'm holding my kid. He's on the play place, and this guy's walking by, and he's got like the Salt Lake Temple tattooed on his calf. And I'm like, they're destroying the temple that God gave them so they can pay honor to the one we built here. Like, how is that supposed to work? But there was an article in the Salt Lake Underground magazine about cultural Mormons, and I read it, and I was so angry because this guy's like, "Look, we don't have to pay attention to what they say at South Temple to understand that this is our identity." And I'm like, "Well, you're not honoring your ancestors who came across on the plains if you're not active in the church, right?" So I wrote an entire blog about how bad cultural Mormonism was and how cowardice it was and how it could not withstand testimony and how it was just going to cave and let homosexuals do this and that and all it was very bigoted. It goes back to the line of I'm really sorry for what I said when I was
Yeah,
Mormon.
I'm sorry for what I said when I was a Mormon.
I
Oh
need to
my
get that
God.
hat,
Yeah,
right?
you and the t-shirt. I feel like you
And the
need to get the
t-shirt.
whole sweatsuit from what I'm
I
hearing from you. So
do. But this is interesting because my wife and I were having this conversation over the last 10 years as I've deconstructed and she's deconstructed. We've both had this conversation. Where do we fit now? We
Mhm.
we don't fit. I can't go to church and because I can't answer that question. Do you believe this is a true church? No, I don't. Do I believe that the Book of Mormon is literally true? No, I do not. You once you hit the point where you can't answer those questions, you don't have a place in the church because you cannot teach you can't teach Sunday school because
Right.
you can't look at a group of young children and say you need to believe this is true, follow the prophet if you do not believe that the prophet is divinely inspired. So where do these people end up? One, that loss of our religious understanding, it destroys our planet, right? I mean, it's very difficult. But at the end of the day, a lot of us come back to the fact is this is our ancestry.
Hmm.
My family came across the plains. The Church History Museum has a painting of Anne Jewel Rowley, who's my ancestor,
Hmm.
right? William Morley Black built grist mills for Brigham Young. These are my
Yep.
family, okay? So that heritage, the sacrifice that they did make coming across the plains, even when it comes down to the darkness of what was often kicked off by some of the theological tenets, it's still our history. And that's what makes cultural Mormons, I think, very interesting to me because they inhabit this middle ground, this hinterland, where they're not believing, and but they still share the history and the community with their families. Unfortunately, the devout families tend to cut off the cultural Mormons to
Hmm.
some extent. So cultural Mormons, they lose the religious connection. They often lose the family connection. So what do they have left? They have communities like the ones we've forged. And cultural Mormons, they may be believing in some aspects, but they end up with us in the post-Mormon or ex-Mormon community because that's where everybody can express and be honest and have these conversations. So I think you're going to see cultural Mormons. Um, I think you're going to see them grow. And I think the church is going to have to go two ways. It's either going to have to go more hardline towards absolutism, which I think is what's coming with Oaks and Bednar and everybody kind of waiting in the wings, or they can go towards what the community of Christ has done,
Hmm.
which they will not do because church leadership, under their mantle of their ideas of divine authority, will not allow them their course to be compared to the community of Christ in any way. So I think that cultural Mormons are going to grow. I think that it'll lead to greater mass exoduses from the church, and I think the church is going to have to go more hardline to maintain the orthodoxy.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that way. And we wrestle with that when we step away from the organized religion and then we start realizing, but this is me. I can't change the way I was raised. I can't change my ancestors, my history. Like I will make posts or I'll say on a podcast, I was at the Church History Museum and I saw this. I will always get somebody that writes back. There's always people that are like trolling. What would you be doing at the Church History Museum? What do you mean? What would I be doing there? Just like you, I have a huge connection to all of that. I even have more of an appreciation now because I try to separate it, like you say, from the
Yeah.
darker aspects, the theological aspects, if I can. And I just celebrate the achievements of my ancestors, what they did, which was pretty amazing, right? To
Yeah.
come
And
here and build what they build. And that's why I claim the word Mormon. I am a Mormon. I was raised Mormon, Mormon-ish. That is what the name of this podcast means. We will
yeah.
never not be. So when somebody says, oh, the secret wives, they're not Mormons, they are, I think, probably cultural Mormons, is what you would tell them. And
Yeah.
they have that history. They can sit together at a dinner table and collectively recite the young women's theme. That is their heritage. You cannot take that away and leave them with nothing. Some
Well,
people equate it to being Jewish, not practicing. Most aren't, many
yeah.
aren't, but they're Jewish, right? And they have this whole, history. They can appreciate things. They can celebrate things. And it's interesting because I feel like just like what you described how you were before, a lot of people are like that. They
Yeah.
get mad at Mormonish for trying to say, I'm a member, I'm a Mormon. They take exception to that. They get upset. It's a really interesting phenomenon to see in the comments that I get.
Well, it's interesting because it's a community identity protectionism, right? You
Interesting.
you can't say, well, these people who are doing what I don't like, you can say they're not really Mormons because that
Mhm.
allows you to feel your exclusivity. It also allows you to put up barriers by which you can protect what makes you feel safe. You build your in group and your out group. What's interesting is there was some BYU professor who put up a video that conflated ex-Mormons with anti-Mormons. And I can't remember who it was, but I posted about it on TikTok. The difference between, I think cultural Mormons and ex-Mormons, for a lot of us in this sphere, and I would have considered myself a cultural Mormon for years. Okay. Um, they go through a process of introspection. What cultural Mormons and ex-Mormons have in common is that they're both trying to find out where they fit and they're trying to
Mhm.
find answers to questions. So they become critical of the institution and critical of the narratives because they're going back and they're looking at elements and saying, how did this affect me?
Mhm.
How did this affect my parents? And because it affected my parents, how did it affect me? Okay. And so it's this process of going through and analyzing the impact and influence on the institution on your life. It begins as a cultural Mormon because you sit back and you say, okay, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. And they go through this process of saying, what do I believe and why do I believe it? Okay. And some people come off of that chart and they're like, okay, I believe these core things as a church, therefore I'm going to maintain this allegiance. And other people come across, say, I believe these things about the church, but these are universal feelings, and I'm going to take these and move on.
Right. I don't have to
Um,
find them only in the church, right?
yeah. And so what people do that identity protectionism is they have to equate being a critical cultural Mormon or a post-Mormon with being ex-Mormon because then they can justify their dismissal of
Yeah.
others. And you
Interesting.
can't, it's how they justify not listening. It's how they justify not being empathetic. It's how they justify not taking other people's arguments seriously. Is because the second they give room, the second they say, okay, maybe there's a good reason for somebody to be offended. Maybe there's a good reason for someone to feel doubt. Maybe there's a good reason for someone to feel that they don't have any power or authority. The second they admit that's a possibility, that other people have a have a good claim on the way they feel, all of a sudden they have to question where they stand. Right. So
No,
I,
that's a great point. And that's why I hear all the time, you may too, you're anti, you're anti,
oh, I hear
you're
it all the
anti.
time.
You know what I mean? That's it. Just you're anti. No, there's such a spectrum. I'm a cultural
Yeah.
Mormon or a
Yeah. And
post-Mormon or this. I'm not anti, but that's just, it's a way to just
yeah.
dismiss you completely and you don't have to think about it again. You're
Yeah.
anti.
I am not anti. I have no desire to see the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints fail. I have no desire to have other people in the church go through the emotional turmoil of deconstruction that
Yeah.
I went through, which is why I believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you have any institution that exists and puts itself out to the public as a source of good needs to be criticized, and it needs to take that criticism seriously and not dismiss it. And so that's how I feel. And so I don't come at anything I do from the purpose of being antagonistic. I'm not like Trump and posting videos of myself dumping shit all over, people worshiping somewhere. Okay. That is intentional antagonism
Right.
designed to rile people up. What
Right.
most Mormon commentators do, what Bill Reel does, what RFM does, what Nemo does, what you and I do, it is a analytical series of question
Right.
asking, right? We are not telling people you should not believe this. I have never said that to anybody. I have said, here are the reasons why I don't believe,
Exactly.
and here are the questions I have, and here is my analysis of the data that I've been given, right? That is not the same thing as Ed Decker marching back and forth in front of Temple Square in his garments or
Yeah.
creating the God makers or anything like
Exactly.
that. Those
We would
people,
never do that.
that's right,
Yeah.
because anti-Mormons use mockery, derision, lies. Their goal is to humiliate people into leaving the church, but joining the religion that they want them to go to. They want people to leave Mormonism and become
Exactly.
Christians, and they want to assert their religion's authority over Mormonism. Cultural Mormons and ex-Mormons and post-Mormons don't operate that way. If somebody leaves the church, we're going to say, okay, come talk to us. We have similar backgrounds.
Mhm.
Let's have this talk. We're not going to say you should not be going to church. You should not be involved with these
Yep.
people. So that's just my rant about that. So
No,
we
we
go
all
to
rant about that because we do feel misunderstood. We all have family members in. We all want what's best for everybody. We all want it to work for everybody. We all want to help it be a safer, better space. And I can point to multiple real world examples where post Mormons have elicited change within the church that is good for people, even though it's not really recognized and people don't understand who did it.
Sam Young.
So, yeah, that's what I'm
What
saying.
Sam Young did was
Exactly.
great, and they
Yep.
excommunicated him for it.
That's what I mean. So we take one for the team. That's what I'm saying. But yeah, so it is interesting. Okay. In betweeners, this is our last category. Low belief in God and heaven, yet more likely than cultural Mormons to attend church, read scriptures, etc. This is a very unusual group. The smallest, the youngest, the least educated, and the most politically diverse group. They represent roughly 6% of self-identified Latter-day Saints Mormons. A caveat from the researcher, this group is especially small in the data set and thus even more exploratory in nature than the other three types. So it does say they're the youngest. So I wonder if we're just talking about people that are just starting to form religious, identities, or even their own identities, low belief in God. So they're kind of agnostic. They don't really believe in the next life. Yet it looks like they're still going to church. They're reading scriptures. I mean, maybe it could be people in the influence of an LDS family that are just simply attending because that's what you do when you're in a family. It could be something like that. It's so small. I wonder.
I would say that this is probably people who are from existing LDS families
Yeah.
who have no other community
Yeah.
outside of the ward and stake that they're raised in
Right.
because their parents are the Orthodox types,
Right.
right? And so these are young people who have not yet gone to college. Okay, so they have not taken a comparative religion class.
Right.
Okay, or anything like that. So they're the youngest. They're probably still living at home. They are the least educated. They haven't gone to college yet. They haven't
Mm-hmm.
moved out. They haven't had their
Mm-hmm.
own life experience yet. They are still operating within the cultural bubble of Utah County or Davis County or wherever the majority of their friends are active LDS or at least, yeah, whether they're active, whether
Yeah.
believing or not. The LDS Church is their social group.
Exactly.
I'll add on to this. I think you can see the reflection of this particular group if you go to the church's social media where they've got like Light of Christ in Idaho or all
Exactly.
these, but they're always saying, "Are you looking for a Christian youth group? Are you
Yeah.
looking for a
Are you
community?"
looking
And
for
they're
friends? Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is that group.
Huh, that's
Um, I
interesting. I think they're the
think
go with the flow group, right?
yeah.
Not so much God, not so much heaven, but hey, I'm hanging out with my friends. It's fun. And I think maybe the church proper thinks, okay, eventually this group will fully get on board. And maybe that's what the mission does. If these really are younger than mission age, that's, where they try to get them to lock in and invest there so that then,
Um,
they're on that path. But yeah, interesting group. One of the more
I,
interesting
I
ones.
would say that this group at six, I would say it probably I would say it probably oscillates between about 6 and 10%. And I would say it probably stays at that level for the continual future because as people are going to either engage in the church and
Yeah.
invest and move up into that
They'll
more
become
orthodox
one or
Jewish
the other.
believer,
Yeah. Yeah.
or they're going to mature, get up into the young adult wards, the singles wards at the University of Utah or BYU or wherever, where again they have that community.
Hmm.
They don't necessarily believe, but they love the activities. They love the
Yeah.
community. They love the dating.
Yeah. Then they get
Now,
married, right?
yeah,
And then they decide they're going to raise their kids in the same tradition. You have a lot of Mormons. That's why I call it the go with the flow
yep.
Mormons. And until something really radical happens, which could be something with one of their kids, 15 years down the road where they have to make a decision as an
They,
adaptive member
they
and
they
and
they have a
choose
kid
your
that comes out
children
and
over the
says they're
church.
gay, and then they have
Yeah, that's
to,
what I'm
yeah.
saying. When something like that happens, that's when these kinds of people that go with the flow hard stop and they have to make a final decision. So
No. It's
interesting. Okay,
interesting.
so we've
It's
defined
interesting.
the
I
different
wonder.
kinds. Yeah, go ahead.
I wonder where these four groups would correlate with what we pulled from the church's Temple Square study.
Yeah,
Because you remember
that
how
is
that had those
interesting.
personality traits?
Yeah.
Um, because I don't see anything here that contradicts the data that the church has on their
Mm-mm.
master plan.
Yeah.
So what that tells me is the church knew the information in this Pew Research study
Yeah.
back in 2021.
Yeah. And they're trying to
And what
cater to the different groups, maybe
right,
guide and manipulate the different groups in special ways to get them to the point, the trajectory where they want. So,
but that
yeah, interesting.
should tell
Yeah.
you how good the
Oh,
data
they're
the church
good.
actually has
Oh, they're
because
good.
we've seen
Who
this
was it
before.
that said Revelation comes from good information or,
Russell Nelson, good
yeah, it
revelation
was
comes from good
President Nelson.
information.
They weren't kidding. Okay, let's look at some of the data crunching. And some of these graphs were in the article, and then I kind of parsed everything out. So there's two slides here. So we have a shift in the types of Latter-day Saints or Mormons over time. So the green line is adaptive believers, the orange line is cultural, the blue is the devout traditionals, and the in-betweeners. And where do we see the greatest drop off, Jim? What line is that?
Ooh, devout traditionalists.
Yeah, that's really telling. I think maybe let go to go to the next slide where I kind of crunch this together and it's a little easier to discuss. There we go. I kind of put this together. So you can read this chart whichever way you want. You can look at devout. These are the devout self-reported members, and you can see in 2007, 62% said we're devout. By 2014, a slight shift to 57%. What happened in
Well,
those
it's
10 years that in 2024, now only 25% self-report as considering themselves a traditional, devout LDS member? That is a
okay.
massive landslide right there.
I have a thought on this. So
Yeah.
look at devout, okay, 62 to 25. Adaptive, 20 to 42.
Uh-huh.
Cultural, 16 to 7. So we're
Yeah.
looking at a 20-point swing here. We're looking at a 10-point roughly swing here. Okay. Now, let's go back. Who becomes prophet right in this region right here?
2018 is
What
Nelson. He
what do
starts
we
right there.
see? What do we
Monson is
see? So
2008.
yeah, so Monsters 2008. By the time we get to 2014, we start to see these shifts.
Right.
15, it's in these areas it's small. By
Right.
the time you get to 18, you have a 10-point swing that
Right.
they're
Well,
seeing in
and
the
look at
church.
this. 2014, by then ish, Monson was pretty out of it, and others more hardliners are kind of pulling the strings behind. You have the pivotal 2015,
Oh
statement,
yes,
doctrine.
yep,
That I
the
think
policy of exclusion
hit
2015,
a
yeah.
lot of the exclusion policy. You can just kind of count those things, and then Nelson coming in and yeah, I think you can
Now,
really track it
I'll,
here.
I'll point out for me, okay, 2014, 2015 were pivotal years because 2014 triggers the true beginning of my deconstruction because that's when the seer stone comes out.
That's true.
Okay, so the seer stone comes out in 14. So you have an entire generation of saints who are told that that wasn't true. All of a sudden, are blindsided by the fact that South Park got it right. Okay, so that's that.
Yeah,
So
that's the
we're
gospel
already
topic
reeling.
essays too, and
Yes,
revelations about Joseph Smith's polygamy. All these
yes.
things track along these
So right
trajectories.
there, you have Zennials. I don't even know. I guess I'm pre-millennial 81. I don't know. But
Uh-huh.
those of us who were in our 30s
Yeah.
in 2014, all of a sudden the narratives start to unravel in 2014. You get the gospel topics essays,
Hmm.
which were very, very painful.
Yes.
The Seer Stone 2015. So you've already got us questioning those 12 months. We're like, okay, what's going on here? We're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle back together so that we can maintain that orthodoxy.
Yeah. It's
I'm gonna
like the
get really worked
bottom
up
fell
about this.
out. Now that you say it
Yes,
that way, the bottom fell out in that probably 18-month period for a lot
yes.
of people.
Me,
Yeah.
me. So looking at this. So I'm gonna think through this. You're gonna help me unpack this. I apologize to the
Here we
audience.
go. We're going
This
to
is
have
gonna get
therapy
deep.
now. That's right.
Okay.
Everybody.
So 2014, that happens. I remember sitting in my in-laws' house in their upstairs reading those documents and being just gobsmacked. So much so I didn't even tell my wife that I was upset about it. I went to the temple. We went up into the mountains. I went fishing. I was just reeling from what I had read. 2015, the policy of exclusion comes out. And that was the height of my attempts to defend the church. I had blogs. What the church is doing is right. I defended the policy. I lost friendships over it. I had people who were telling me it was wrong, and I was like, no, it's right. The prophet's doing this. This was revelation. I lost friendships over the policy of exclusion. As you tick forward, you get 2919, right? Well, the church undoes that. It's no longer revelation from the Lord. It's now just a policy that they reversed. Nelson becomes president in 18. And if you look at the numbers here, okay, your in-betweeners are escalating. Between 2014 and
Yep.
2018, your culturals are escalating. But 2014, Gospel Topics essays destroys that devout traditionalist. All of a sudden, 2018, Nelson comes to office. What do you see? A change in narrative, a change in tone. Goes from being the God of law and order to being this hovering helicopter parent who just really wants you to keep the covenant path. Okay,
And don't
and
use the word
then
Mormon. And no, don't
don't
do
use the word
that. And what
Mormon.
about that? Yeah.
That's right. We start seeing the creation, the leaning into of all of the evangelical tones that we start taking over. The
Mhm.
language starts
Yep.
changing. The focus starts changing. So in 2018, everything that we've seen, that we've talked about on the multiple podcasts we've done, can be tied back to the destruction of the devout traditionalists taking place in 2014, because I think that's where the church committed suicide. The gospel
Yep.
topics
They lost
essays
it.
did that.
It
And I
fell
had
off the
not put
cliff
that
for
together
devout
before I looked at
members. Yep, the cliff. You can see there. And for those that are listening, not watching, I might suggest that you even try to go over to YouTube and see this, but you can see the line of the devout traditionalists at 2014, just a steep decline, just never recovers. And you can see the lines of the cultural or the adaptive sort of gently rising as the traditionalists go, okay, well, maybe now I'm going to feel, there's this jockeying and change of position that you can really see through, especially through the
this is
Nelson years. Yeah, boy, that's so
this is
telling.
huge for me,
Yeah,
because in this chart I can see my
yeah,
religious deconstruction on paper.
yeah,
This is stunning to me.
yeah. I wonder if the church has seen this graph. And then if you go to this one where I kind of parsed it out, it just reiterates what we said in the other ones. So interestingly, the in-betweener, that really obscure group that we're not quite sure about, in 2007, 2% were in between. 2014, the same.
Yeah.
2024,
There's a
six. A
4%
few more
increase. Yeah.
people, are kind of creeping into that group. But where it's really holding steady is the adaptive and the cultural. Those are the ones that rose, quite noticeably, and the devout just absolutely tanked and plummeted as everything they thought was the gospel truth, no pun intended, was basically yanked out from under them at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
It's kind of heartbreaking, because we can talk about this crunching data and analytically, but behind every data point is a story like yours, like mine, where your whole world is rocked, and you lose relationships and everything changes and your ideologies change. You lose your place, you lose a lot. So it's not just the data point, it's everybody's real story. And I'm guessing everybody watching or listening, can find themselves in that graph.
yeah. I'm kind of gobsmacked because I
I
had
know.
seen that chart before we started recording, but it wasn't until we started to talk through all this
Yeah.
that I saw that. I was like, holy shit,
Oh,
2014, that was the year for me.
yep.
2015 was the year for me.
You
So,
and a lot of people, it looks like, from
man,
that plummet. I mean, the line is the line.
I
If your
just remember
401k was doing that, you would take steps. I mean,
2001 when I went on my mission.
yeah,
I had questions about stuff, and I was given a paper by Joseph R. McConkie, Joseph McConkie and somebody at BYU, which was a paper about the seer stone. And in that paper from BYU, they dismiss everybody who says anything about seer stones. They say it's a lie,
yeah,
all this other stuff. So I went on my mission, and to me, the seer stone had been debunked. BYU published a paper on it. It couldn't be true. So, and then 2014 comes along and there's this picture of it. And I just remember thinking, I lied to those people. The
yeah,
people that I talked to on my mission, I lied to them about the
yeah,
history of this. And then I found out about Lowry Nelson letters on race. And it hit me again that I taught a black family in California
yeah,
that the priesthood ban was never doctrine, that it was just a cultural mistake. And then I pivoted that we should be thankful that it was taken away because it showed that God was correcting the course of the church. I lied to those people.
yeah,
I didn't personally lie to them, but the institution gave me the information with which not to teach people the truth, but with to teach people the most recent iteration of the church's message. And for a lot of us who are missionaries in the early 2000s, by the time you get to 2014 and the polygamy stuff starts coming out, and if you were in California like I was, we were, tracting against like Bayside Church in Roseville. You
yeah,
had what was his name? Dick Bear. So some of the big anti-Mormons of the 90s
right.
lived in Northern California. And so I remember being questioned about Joseph marrying other men's wives in
Mhm.
someone's house. I told those people that they were repeating anti-Mormon propaganda.
They knew more
I
than
told
you did. You hear this all the time, right?
They knew
They
way
know
more than
more.
I did. They
They
were
knew way.
right. I was wrong, and I was the representative of God.
Yep, but that's not on you. That's on the institution. I just remember seeing the pictures of the seer stone and going, "You mean you had it? You
The
have
whole
it?
time,
You have it?" And here's a picture. It blew my mind. You had it. I think we can also look at that graph and say social media, the rise of social media, cell phones, being able to look things up, that all is really coming into its own during that era. I think all those factors play into it. So,
Crazy.
and there you have it. So, all right. So much to unpack here. Okay. So here's some interesting information. It's called engagement in spiritual and religious practices, the proportion participating in each religious practice. And it's kind of a sliding scale here. I don't know if it's easier. What do you think, Jim, to talk about it from this slide or the next slide where I kind of put everything together? But it just kind of shows.
Yeah, I'll just kind of break it down. So
Yeah, kind of break it down
here,
through each practice. Yeah, and what they're saying. I think that's the best idea.
For those of you who are listening and you can't actually see it, this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 5 bars, right? And the first bar at the top of the page says weekly church attendance, and then it's got cultural Mormons at 21%, in-betweeners at 28%, your adaptive believers at 86, and your devout traditionalists at 96%. So what that means is 25% of those identified as in the church as devout believers, they attend 96% of the time at church. So most of the people who are being counted in the pews on a weekly basis, where that your ward gets their tithing money back off of, are the devout believers. But it also means that the in-betweeners and the cultural Mormons, they're not attending every single week. They're not attending really maybe once a month. Okay.
Yeah.
Weekly scripture reading, your cultural Mormons fall down at 7%. Why? Because they're not in it for the theology. They're not in it for the doctrine. They're in it for the community and the history and their relationships. Yeah. Your in-betweeners rank about 31%. And why would the in-betweeners be 31%? Because those are the ones who are looking to find their identity. They are reading the scripture because they are looking for that confirmation of the Spirit so that they can find their identity and their place in the church. Okay?
And they could be in seminary. If we really think they're younger, or at least in their devout parents' home, it could be something where,
institute.
Based on that. Yeah, institute, something like that. So
your weekly scripture reading, your adaptive believers at 77%, and your devout at 92. So pray several times a day. Your cultural Mormons, about 12% pray. Now, that prayer, that may not be the religiously devout prayer. That may be the type of prayer where it's that personal expression of feeling, it's that personal expression of faith, not necessarily oriented towards a institutional type of prayer. On that scale, 84% of your devout pray multiple times a day. They definitely pray before they go to bed. But if they're primarily men and they're primarily working, they're not praying while they're at work.
Right. They're not praying at lunch. Our family had to pray even if we went to a restaurant. We were that family where you had to, do this at the restaurant. So awkward. Yeah. No, I felt every moment of the awkwardness of everything I was made to do. I knew I was a weirdo. I knew it. Even when I was very small, I knew it, but I didn't know how to do anything about it. So I'm still weird, but and these aren't super surprising as you look at the blue dots, until I think, you get down to some of the other ones where it's a little more iffy, but you would expect them to attend church, read scriptures, pray several times a day. You would expect that.
All right. So this is the breakdown. So devout attend church weekly, read scriptures, weekly scripture reading, both in the 90s. Prayer daily is 84. Proselyte is 58. Now, proselyte is interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too.
It's like proselyte. I wonder what proselyting is defined as. Is that just sharing your testimony with people? Is that just telling people, hey, I'm a Mormon, or I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? I wonder what proselytizing means, because I can't think of a time where I would ever consider myself as proselytizing if I wasn't in a mission, right?
Yeah. Well, I think anymore what they consider proselyting is inviting someone to church. That is the huge focus, and they took that from Christianity. That's a common thing in other denominations where you just say, hey, would you like to come to my church? that really wasn't a thing, I think, until just recently, where you see those missionary ads all the time. It's all about, hi, I just met you. Would you like to come to church? Do you want to come to church? And maybe that's not so foreign feeling to LDS members to say to somebody, yeah, I go to that church over there. Would you like to come? Of course, we all know it's a very different church experience than most Christians would be used to, but I think maybe that's it. It's not like it used to be, right? RFM told us the other day on the newscast that for Christmas at his workplace in the 80s, he gave everyone at his workplace a signed Book of Mormon with his testimony in it. That was his office Christmas gift. I know. I know. I mean, we were hardcore, right? Back in the day, you bought those Book of Mormons that they were trying to get rid of the surplus and you
Oh
took
my
them on
gosh, I remember
business
that. Yeah.
trips. Yeah. No, that was huge. But I think anymore now, I think people, even devout, are respectful. They know they're now aware of all kinds of other faiths. They're aware
Well,
of them at least. And so
remember
maybe just saying, would you like to come try out my church? Maybe that's proselyte.
remember a couple years ago how the church had all this stuff out about sharing the gospel in natural ways?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like there was actually this push to tell
Yep.
people this is how to do this, but not make it awkward.
Yeah.
Like the church was admitting that it's awkward. Like
Yeah,
I
there's
remember
nothing more
laughing.
awkward than teaching someone not to be awkward. I remember that. They did little role playing, like pretend you're at a barbecue. Hi, Jim. So I'm a member of the church of, it is. There's nothing more awkward because sharing the gospel is awkward. And I've told the story before about my parents. They'd get the film strip projector from the library. They'd show Man's Search for Meaning or Man's Search for Happiness. I knew we were inviting neighbors over every time they would bring that projector home. And even as a kid, I was like, no, don't let it be anybody from my school. I just knew, beep. It was just weird. I know you're too young to know what a film strip projector is,
Oh
probably.
no, we still had them. We had those, and
Yeah.
I was talking to my friend of the Appalachian Oracle. She and I were having a conversation the other day because she was from a very high demand Appalachian fundamentalist
Oh,
group.
wow.
And so we were having a conversation and we stumbled upon our dual hatred of felt boards. Because and then we were laughing about what happened to the religious felt
Yeah.
board in the
The
street,
flannel
right? There used to
board.
be all these little
Yep.
cutouts and
Gosh.
now they're
Yeah.
gone.
Yep, in those little
Um,
folders in the ward library. That's right. The
yes,
interesting one I think here is meditate weekly. Okay, so when I was growing up, 70s and 80s church, meditation, no,
I
no
was
way.
told it was a
It's an
bad thing.
Eastern thing.
That's
It's
right.
evil. No yoga, no
Yep.
meditating. Don't you dare do that. And maybe they mean this differently, like just reflecting or thinking about your religion, but just the fact that they use the word meditate, that was an absolute off the table. We don't do that. So it's interesting. They do say 58% of the devout, self-proclaimed LDS say that they do sit and meditate, weekly. So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I remember when my dad got into it, I remember being skeptical. And I would have been, gosh, this would have made me 15 or 16 at the
Mhm.
time. And mind you, I struggled as a kid because I was a rebellious kid. I wanted to do things I knew were wrong, and I did things. So I had this struggle deep down inside where I felt like I was a bad kid, but I also knew what I should be doing with the church, right? And so I struggled because I would do something bad, and I knew it was bad. I beat myself up about it, but I still knew what the Orthodox position was.
Mhm.
And then when I would repent, I would swing really, really hard in the other direction for a period of time and be super, super, super orthodox because that's how I felt I had what I had to do to get right with God after being a sinful, bad kid, right? So my dad gets sent to Eastern thinking and all this other stuff, and I come home and I actually walked in on my dad meditating in his garments in the front room of our apartment. Few things prepared me in life for
Yeah,
that
no,
moment,
that's
right?
that's kind of an oxymoron. At least it would have been
Yeah,
in my household. You can't be wearing the
yeah,
holy garment if you're going to do that Eastern evil practice. So how
yep.
interesting.
So like
But good
I
on
asked
your
him.
dad for being kind of
Yeah.
more forward thinking and understanding the benefits of that. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
No, my dad was funny about that. My dad was really interesting because when I started to go through my deconstruction, he was one of the few people who I was honest about. And I remember I was on the phone with him and I was talking to him about it. And I remember he was on the phone with me. He just goes, you know what, James, you sound angry.
Oh,
And I was like, I am angry, and let me tell you why. And he just sat there and listened.
wow.
And to be honest, my mom too. A couple years ago, we sat at the kitchen table and we had a conversation. I kind of walked through what my experience was and the negatives of it. And my mom was very, very gracious. She just said, I had no clue that you'd been through that. I had no clue that
Wow.
you experienced. She didn't discount what I said, Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I was very lucky to have, I'm very lucky to have very good parents.
No, that is a really good experience. And we love to hear that because so many have the opposite. So I think one
Yep.
big takeaway here is that nobody likes to proselyte. That is the lowest percentage across the board. Nobody wants to do that at all. But everything else is pretty much as you would expect, honestly. But that the adaptive Mormon is interesting because like you said, they're there, they're doing everything, but they just have a different mindset, but they're still doing things. So that's a group to watch. So it goes on to say adapting to the modern era, right? That's our day today, the modern era. The more one moves down this list from devout to in-betweener, the younger, and the more radically and politically diverse, see that again lets me know it is a much younger person,
Yep.
the individual is likely to be. Bass was quick to stress, however, that he does not believe the shrinking number of traditionalists is solely the work of population turnover, meaning, that the older people are going to be dying off and, the younger people are coming up. So that's a factor perhaps, but it's not the only factor. He goes on to say today's adaptives, he concluded in the study, are in many instances yesterday's devout traditionalists.
Yep.
That's what you said, who have readily adapted their social beliefs to match the modern era. And that's it. That's the mom supporting her kid and her friend group and LGBTQ and all of that.
And
And people
it's
like that.
really one of the things about church history and church theology is that it, in my experience, it does not stand up well to scrutiny. And I think, and now it stands up if you can say, I'm going to start off with this conclusion. If you're going to take the, what's his name? The guy from BYU who does the,
Oh, Brian, who was it again? Oh my gosh, now I can't think. Yeah. He
Yule
says
Huizenstein or whatever his name
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. I start with a
Um,
conclusion and then
Start with the
I do all
conclusion.
my data and research to make it fit that conclusion. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So if you take that approach, and that, by the way, is the approach that the church wants you to take. You start at the premise that this is true, and then everything you take, you fit into that lens, and that's the lens I had when I wrote my book back in
Mhm.
2014, right? Um, if you do that, then you can rationalize anything to fit, just like
Mhm.
anybody in any controlled uh, information cycle, circular logic group. You can make anything fit. Now, um, what happens is as people begin to pick these things apart and they apply them to their lived experience, you either have to choose to throw away what you actually feel, or you have to choose to say, okay, how do I make this work? As people make that decision to say, okay, Joseph Smith did lie to Emma. How do I work through this? That leads them to a place where instead of saying Joseph was right to do it because God told him it was right to do it and this is okay, therefore God does it, they say, okay, Joseph was flawed here.
Mhm.
I have to accept the fact that he lied to his wife. And I have to accept the fact that that probably caused her extreme pain. And I have to accept the fact that D&C 132 is written by a God that is entirely indifferent to the pain and suffering of this woman. All of a sudden, that opens up doors where you can start thinking through things on a completely different level. And that's where you become adaptive,
Yeah.
you know? And so the shrinking number of traditionalists is precisely what this article says. It's precisely what we've talked about. And the adaptives, I mean, this is really just crazy stuff.
Yeah, no, it is. It's so point on, it's so right there. You kind of think about it, but to see it like this, and I would say that the exclusion policy exactly fits that narrative where you have a traditionalist where suddenly how you feel and how everyone around you feels the world, it doesn't fit what you're being told. And you can go one or the other direction. And we all
So
know
many
so many
people,
stories. Yeah.
like that was one of the things that I thought through was it was like, okay, if and that was one of the things that really damaged my feelings about where God stood in the church was as I was defending the exclusion policy and I was writing my blogs and arguing with people, I was watching people who were torn apart by it,
Yeah.
who were pitted against the church. And for the first while, I was like, well, they're pitted against the church because they've been led astray and these are
Yeah.
worldly
They're
philosophies.
anti.
And then you start to realize that these are people who have, members of their family, kids,
Hmm.
brothers,
Hmm.
sisters. And there's a guy in the church. His name is Adam Fisher. Adam lives up in Davis County. He and I went to high school together. He is a therapist. I don't know all he does. He's brilliant. But he and I were writing back and forth. And Adam is one of those people who, he challenged me and he just says, look, Jim, I understand where you're coming from, but you have to stop and take into account that maybe this is not what God wants. Maybe this is cultural prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
And because he told me about his family members and whatnot. And I walked away from that exchange like, Adam's lost. If you would have told me that years later, Adam and I would agree, it's because I'm the one who became the adaptive person.
Yes.
But Adam was right all those years ago. And it was because he was living the experience and I was not living that
Yep.
experience. And where he was coming from was from a place of pure, um, pure understanding because he was living it. And what happens is so many Mormons, because we are taught what the dogmas are, we assume we don't have to live an experience or to take into account other people's lived experience to pass judgment on whether or not it's good or bad. But the policy of exclusion drove that home. And so lots of people left the church because of it. And you would think that if God was calling the shots, God would have known what that fault was going to be, would have known what that policy, the harm that policy was going to cause friends and family, and would have mitigated it, just like God would have said, okay, DNC 132, I'm not going to threaten to destroy you. I'm going to
Exactly.
be, and so it came down to me to this dichotomy between this God that the church wants us to believe in, where he cares about you, he just wants you to be happy, just wants you to be good, but he's really, really willing to do things that are indifferent to your emotional status,
Despite
you
the
know,
evidence, right? To the
despite the
contrary,
evidence.
that's it.
Yeah,
And a lot of people left when the exclusion policy was repealed because they
that was
said,
huge
what
for
was
me.
what was it all for? Which is why I bring up tank top garments all the time. Same thing. What was it all for? The
Yeah,
wishy-washiness, the blink of an eye in God's time. Why? And the
yeah.
pain caused in the middle. It causes the devout traditionalists to rethink everything and either land at being more adaptive or land completely off the spectrum because you just can't do it anymore. So, and this I think is this is
I'll
the
read
poison
this.
pill. Yeah, take this one. It is the poison pill, just as far as, what everybody cares about and what the church has got completely wrong.
Okay, so this is talking about that adaptive to match the modern era, and it says one likely driver he highlighted was the growing acceptance of homosexuality both in and out of the church, which opposes same-sex marriage. As part of the 2023-24 survey, Pew asked 565 Latter-day Saints whether society should accept homosexuality. Devout traditionalists blew away the competition with a 90% saying no. Adaptive believers were almost split down the middle with while more than 60% of cultural Mormons and 90% of in-betweeners said
Yeah.
yes.
It's the great divide, isn't it? I mean, you
Well,
can
yeah,
see
and
it right there.
the church cannot give ground on this,
No.
because the church's concept and structure of God is eternally heterosexually
Mm-hmm.
procreative.
Yep.
And they cannot step aside from that because the entire doctrine, the entire idea of God is a binary of procreative male and females based upon a Western Christian standard, right?
Yep.
Now, the church did deviate from that. Okay. The whole concept of polygamy was,
Ironically,
different.
right?
But the concept of polygamy within Mormonism made women a addendum to the man.
Mm-hmm.
The man was exalted, the women was exalted underneath him
Mm-hmm.
as part of him. They were packages that he carried on his back into heaven.
Right.
But women themselves didn't actually have any covenants or any responsibilities. It was through the man that came down through, and that's obvious. If you read your "Come Follow Me" this week, read the last half of DNC 132, and you'll get that entire message. But the
Yeah, they don't
church
want
can't
you to
give
do
ground.
that. There's a
Oh,
reason
no.
that it's 129. No, it's 130, 131, and 132. They lumped it all in, called it all obedience. There's no mention of any of the actual, meat of 132. They're definitely trying to
Well,
hide that, I think. But, if you look at the makeup of the celestial kingdom, the upper kingdoms, the minority is a heterosexual husband, wife, children. It's such a hot mess, if I can say that, with all kinds of sealings and dynastic sealings and
yep.
polygamous. It looks nothing like husband, wife,
Well,
children. And
let's
the church is going to have to, they're going to have to do something. I don't know how they
let's
can. I have some
add another
suggestions, but
layer
they're
to
going to
this.
have to.
There's a quote from Eliza R. Snow where she talks about the fact that love, romantic love, was never part of the calculus for
Yeah.
marriage.
No.
Okay. So within Mormonism, the idea of marrying for love or for eternal companionship or for your just genuine connection with another human being did not become a thing until after the death of polygamy, because polygamy was utilitarian in purpose. Brigham Young talked about he didn't matter if his wife loved him or not. They should just be happy to be married to a priesthood man.
Yeah, I can find
Okay.
another one, dime a
So,
dozen, that kind of thing. I would
yep.
say, even though, even going forward, there is a sense that some people express, oh, I found someone that checked the boxes.
Yeah.
I was
Which
told
is
it was this,
tragic.
we both need to love God and then we're going to be okay together. It's just, there's so many wedges in between actual natural relationships that, I mean, we all know the stories.
And that's why they can't give any room on gay marriage.
Yeah.
Because unions of people who do not fit that Western traditional procreative binary. And I know they make exemptions for couples that can't have kids. I'm not going to make the argument. But marriage within Mormonism was never about love. It was always about duty to God. It was about filling a role and helping to complete the restoration of the church. It didn't become about love until after they had to abandon that divine commandment. Okay, all of a sudden it's not about polygamy anymore. So we have to pivot to super monogamy.
Right. And family. That was
Now,
a huge pivot
and
that they
family.
made in the 60s because, Mormons were not seen as very favorable. And the pivot was, oh, you guys have big families. Let's push that. We're family. We're mother, father, kids. We're family. And that tracked with everything American values in the family. And that's what they became. But if you think about the marriage ceremony, you really don't even marry each other. You both agree to
Covenant.
enter into a covenant with God. I mean, most people by now have probably been to marriages outside of the temple. And shockingly, the couple look right at each other, say their own heartfelt words to each other, express their love, and then receive, wishes, words of blessing, from someone they've chosen to officiate. But that's marrying each other. A temple ceremony is not marrying each other. You're
And
making a
see,
promise to be in the
what
system.
what we've got here is an entire generation, or multiple generations now, since the beginning of the 1900s, of Latter-day Saints and their kids who have been raised to believe that they need to find someone that they love. That love is what gets that when there's love at home. We're taught about that song, right? And now more and more kids, because of the growing understanding of that homosexuality is not a mental illness, that it is not something that somebody chooses. And the more kids are confronted with this reality, they have friends who are gay or stuff. All of a sudden, they realize that those people have feelings, that they're people
Mhm.
too. I believe that part of the push against the church's positions on homosexuality in the early 20th century and even up through when we were young, essentially, was the process of dehumanization. If they can dehumanize
Mhm.
those motives. Because I remember talking to Avram Gileadi about this, and Avram Gileadi taught me at that period of time that if God is heterosexual and procreative, then Satan must be gay.
Oh, oh,
And
great. Okay.
yeah,
All
but
right.
that was being taught in Provo. I remember hearing this from multiple
Abraham.
people.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Oh, he and I had
Yeah,
some
no, I
wild.
know. I know. No, but you're
Um,
absolutely right. And now everyone has been to a same-sex wedding. Everybody has friends who are married in a same-sex, you know them. You have a lived experience now. And that doesn't fit the narrative that you're hearing at church. You're like,
yep.
but wait, they love each other. They're in a
And
really
if
happy, committed relationship. Wait, they adopted a baby or they had a baby. Wait, they are a family. Wait, the
and if the
Supreme Court
narrative
is thinking about taking that away. Oh, no, they didn't because they can't. They're a family as much as anybody else. But I'm telling you, people, they didn't understand this. And I'll give you an example of my dad. He's just so cute. He came to visit me at Easter time once. We had a big neighborhood Easter egg hunt. We had a lesbian couple with a daughter that came, they lived in the neighborhood forever and they were awesome. Even though it was an all Mormon neighborhood, everybody was like, oh, they've been here forever. They're a part of us. We know them. And so we're all around doing the Easter egg hunt. My parents have visited and I introduced them to my dad and he's very welcoming and warm and hello and everything. And then when they walk away, I said, yeah, no, they live there. They're a couple and that's their daughter. And he goes, he laughed. He's probably about 78 at the time. And he laughed. And I go, why are you laughing? He goes, what are you, your kid? wait, you're serious? Those women are married? No concept. And again, he's the nicest person, but no idea that this could be a couple that's been married for 20 years with a child,
Yep.
until you have that experience. And everyone is having that experience now. So the narrative doesn't fit that you're hearing
Yeah.
at
And
church.
so you've got these adaptive believers who are split down the middle because they are raised amongst a older generation that is more devout traditionalist. And so they are going through the cognitive dissonance of
Mm-hmm.
trying to put this together.
Yep.
And these adaptive believers, they're in their 30s and 40s, and so they're having kids that are now struggling with these social issues. And there's no longer the stigma that being gay is a mental illness,
Exactly.
and there's no longer a stigma that it's satanic. And so the church itself has said that it's okay to be gay, you just can't practice,
Yeah,
right?
they have to now. They
And
have to appear to be inclusive, appear to do everything that they can.
so the
Although,
push's own,
yeah.
the church's own push for inclusivity and its own taming of its 1980s and 90s rhetoric leads these adaptive believers and these cultural Mormons into a place where they can be more accepting. And
Mhm.
then these adaptive and cultural members, if they stay in the church, matriculate up into positions of power like bishoprics, where when a kid comes forward to admit to something, they come to that conversation from a position of empathy and understanding rather than from a position of tradition and hard dogma. And
Yep.
that's how the church changes, and the church knows it.
Yeah, the
They
problem
can't
with
stop
that
that.
is that even though those people do rise to the top, and I have very good friends in that scenario where the husband was a bishop and they were allies, and he wore a pride tie to church every Sunday when he officiated, and it was very difficult. There was tons of pushback. There were people complaining, writing letters and things like that, and they did what they could for the years that he was a bishop. And then finally, it was just too much to fight against that, and they finally had to make kind of the decision to step back, but they fought the good fight, for all that time and tried to make a difference with kids that were questioning or struggling, or to set an example, even though there was so much pushback. So, you can do that, and hopefully they left their mark, but then eventually for your own self-preservation, you oftentimes then have to
You,
just,
you
move
have to
on and
choose
do
mental
something
health.
else. Yeah, you do. I mean, they had their pride flags stolen. They had, letters written to the stake about how horrible they were. It was
So
unbelievable,
I went, I went to my first Pride event just a couple weeks ago. I had never been to one before. The Appalachian Oracle called me and says, "Hey, we're in Huntington. You should come down to Pride." And so I did. I went, and I was walking on the street with them, and we're talking to people, and I ran into people I knew from work.
Oh,
Guy from the recruitment office comes up, starts talking to me. A guy I knew from American Airlines. I come walking up and he walks up to me. I look at him, he looks at me, he's like, Jim, comes up,
yeah.
gives me a hug. He's like, this is my husband. And we had this long conversation
Yeah.
about what life was like at the airline, right? And I had never been to one of those events. And well, I mean, we're kind of getting off kilter here, but the point is that I was the hard traditionalist who
Yes.
argued against gay marriage.
Yes.
I worked for the church during Prop 8. I was involved in all of it. And now, after this process of watching the church's narrative change, all that kind of stuff, I'm in that position now where I am that
Mhm.
open-minded person, or I try to be
Yep.
so I can understand. The church, this is the way the Orthodoxy is going. And the church is they're either going to keep hemorrhaging people or they're going to have to mitigate. I think they're desperate to mitigate, but they also know that they can only mitigate so much before they have to
Exactly.
start sacrificing core doctrines.
Yep.
And the gay marriage thing challenges the very understanding of exaltation itself. That's why they can't.
Yep, it's a
They can't
delicate
go on.
dance. Mormonish did an episode on a way forward. It was based on an article called "A Welding Link: A Way Forward," where the
I
author
remember
went
this.
back
Yeah.
through time, and there are ways if they want to do it, if they need to do it. There are ways that you can make it. You can be married with a special blessing. We'll have separate you, and that's another podcast altogether, which we already did. But there are ways if they must do it that they can do it. So no, it is completely relevant. It is the issue I think that is making that plummet of the traditionalists into more accepting. So here's just a chart kind of showing what we were just discussing, the views on society's acceptance of homosexuality. And this compares, let's see, homosexuality should be accepted by society. That's the blue box. It should be discouraged by society. That's the orange box. And then just an other. So you have overall in the United States, 67 Yes, accept it. Everybody's on board. The in-betweeners, 87%. That's that younger group. They're all like, of course, almost all of them. Cultural Mormons, little more than half, like they described, 62%. Of course, this should be accepted. Adaptive believers, right around there, half and half, 52, of course. And then you just get to the biggest difference there. Your devout traditionalists down at only 13%, meaning 87% say absolutely no way, no how. And that's a huge difference. Everybody else is
No.
kind of, the in-betweeners, cultural Mormons, adaptive believers are right kind of in line with the US overall. Like you said, the cultural norms, which is what they're trying to kind of meet because that's their lived experience. The devout traditionalists, no way, no how. They're not going to
Oh,
do that.
I'm not in Utah anymore. Thank God. Um, my question is how much of the devout traditionalists, how much overlap do you think there is out there between them and the hardline Republican Charlie Kirk types and the trad wife
I
types
know.
and all
See,
that?
and
Like
that's a
how much of
hard,
that do you
yeah,
see?
that's a hard call. Utah is a really interesting place to be like that. Yeah. And then when you talk about the church culturally, internationally, if you were to see that graph, you would see a lot more alignment with the devout traditionalists. So that's something the church needs to
Oh,
consider too, as they have more converts and the predominant language in the church is French. Those views are very different. Other churches have faced this, and the Methodists, I believe it was, had a schism over it. So those are all things to look forward to in the future. These are things that are happening. These are
that's crazy.
conversations and ways that people are looking at things. So, but it all spurs change. That's the whole point. Nobody can sit still. Everybody is going to have to kind of decide where they line up.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
here,
this
you
this
can
is gonna
take
get
this. Yeah,
interesting.
no, I know.
I'll be careful.
I
Uh,
know. It's
I'll, I'll go ahead and read this. MAGA and Mormonism, a potential wedge. Looking at the data, Bass has a second suspicion about what may be driving scripture reading, church attending Latter-day Saints to adopt more nuanced beliefs. Latter-day Saints are historically among the most reliable Republicans of any religious group in the country. The rise and return of Donald J. Trump and his Make America Great Again strain of conservatism, by the way, it's not conservative, it's nationalist. Let's be clear about that. Have complicated, albeit not severed, that relationship, and Bass suspects led some to question their GOP identity. Absolutely true. I'll tell you why this appeals to me here in a second. And their religious identity with, after all, devout traditionalists were, per 2023-24 data, the most likely to identify with the Republican Party, and in-betweeners were the least.
Mhm.
Okay, so this goes back to the conversation that you and I had about the proclamation of the family and the ties Mormonism had to movements like the Falwells and
Yeah,
Focus
yeah,
on the
yeah.
Family, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
When I was working as a researcher, I worked for a group called the Lighted Candle Society. And my boss at the Lighted Candle Society was a guy named John Harmer. John Harmer was Reagan's lieutenant governor of California. He was the president of the National Center for Constitutional Studies that tied in with Cleon Skousen and all of these groups. Okay. So that strain, that conservative Reagan strain of 1980s republicanism is what I was brought up in the 80s and 90s.
Yep.
Okay.
Me too.
Now, as the Trump stuff has come up, members of the church, especially conservative Mormons who were brought up in that, where Reagan was absolutely the best thing, the Constitution was absolutely the best thing, the separation of powers was absolutely the best thing, strict constitutionalism. What we see now, and what a lot of people see, is there's a rule in politics. You never want your party to have power that you do not want the next party in power to exercise. Okay. And so a lot of people are looking at what Trump is doing and saying, okay, this is not constitutional. This is not conservative. And so it does cause a problem because I am in trouble right now with my family where I found out that people are, I had my nephew talk to my son and ask what's going on with Uncle James because they think I'm a liberal because I
Oh
openly
dear.
question whether or not the abuse of government, which I see is okay. And a lot of young Mormons and middle-aged Mormons like myself who have traditionally been conservative look at what we see. And we look at, like I said earlier, the video of Trump dumping excrement on protesters
Yeah.
and the intentional and calling people idiots and retards, and the White House press secretary responding to a question about who approved meetings with Putin with "your mom did."
Yeah.
You know, there's a great article in The Atlantic called "The Confederacy of Toddlers," which goes through and talks about the behavior that we see from government. Mormons who were raised to revere the Constitution, who were raised to view all of these things, whether it was through Cleon Skousen or Ezra Taft Benson, the hardliners look at what's happening and they cheer it because it goes along with their confirmation bias. It
Yes.
gives them a group of enemies that they can rally against,
Hmm.
and it gives them a message that gives them a sense of superiority. For a lot of people who are in that middle ground, what they see is their neighbors being hurt.
Yeah.
Kids being in cars with tear gas thrown inside it, which just happened a couple days ago. People disappearing, anti-gay rhetoric coming from the conservative side, strains of nationalism that they don't believe in, uh, disparaging messages, and just what they see coming out of what happens now is not what we were taught in church. And if you were to go back and pull Benson and say, "Hey, I need you to go read Ezra Taft Benson and tell me how much of what you read in Ezra Taft Benson jives with what you're hearing now from the administration," I don't know anybody in the conservative side of the church who could say that it even remotely matches, but they're willing to dismiss it. They're
Exactly.
willing to support it, not because they believe it, but because they're fans. They are fans of the power structure, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
um, but this is
Fans
absolutely
against
correct.
in spite of the facts. That's it.
In
And it's
spite of the
very
facts.
frustrating to families. It's I think, I think wards are going to become a hotbed, if people were to really express how they felt. There's some very strong emotions and feelings on both sides, and you look
But
at your neighbor and go, how can you be okay with this? Everybody's saying that to each other. So
I
yeah,
think
this is
the
going to
MAGA
make some
divide is real.
changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely correct because, I'm like I said, I'm middle of the road now. Like I'm a political independent.
Hmm.
But the conservatism I was taught as a young Mormon is not the conservatism that exists today. And I would
Right.
imagine that for people who are who are experiencing faith crises and trying to navigate this by talking to their families and appealing to scripture, they either have to choose to read the political violence into scripture and support
Hmm.
it, or they have to walk away. And that leaves them in a hinterland because they've been trained to view Democrats as evil.
Exactly. Yeah, there's really nowhere to go. So you have to kind of make it work as you will. That's exactly right. So yeah, well, I will say I've been looking at all the Tim Ballard posts and things like that as I've been reporting on that, and just comment after comment in the hundreds. I'm faithful LDS and I'm with you, Tim. I'm faithful LDS. I support you, Tim. We support you in the church, Tim. It's all there. It's all
Yep.
there, despite anything else. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast too, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
So
I could
here's
go off
kind
on
of,
a lot of this.
I know. We should, oh my gosh. Oh, it's so much. Oh my goodness. A widespread secular surge. I love that. The secular surge. That's it. Put all these narratives and numbers together, Bass said, and the story that emerges is this. So here we get to it. Whereas in the past, one was either active, devoted, Latter-day Saint, or inactive, increasing numbers are claiming the label less as a religious identity, but as with many Catholics and adherents of Judaism, because it is a part of our heritage. And this is what we've said over and over in different ways on this podcast. Less religious ideology, identity, and more about heritage. Cultural Mormons, Bass writes, are growing in numbers. What this means for this relatively young faith, Mormonism, it won't even be 200 years old until 2030, is unclear. Can Mormonism become an ethnic or a cultural identity independent of belief? The study's author wonders, will the church embrace this looser affiliation or insist that real belonging requires orthodoxy? And that's it. I feel that, the Mormon moment is happening right now in media. You have so many Mormon personalities with their own shows appearing on different things, and most of them are cultural Mormons. It's their heritage, it's their ideology, it makes them unique, it's how they grew up. They still, follow some of the practices, although not all. And that's what's being portrayed in the media to the world at large. This extreme orthodoxy, that's more like people want to look at it like a train wreck, right? Wow, Mormons do what? What's this dark side? So it is unclear. I think that's the bottom line, but we're going to track it and it may not become clear until hindsight, right? We're in the middle of it right now. All we know is anecdotal stories, lived experiences. We can talk about the things that we see, but, to the person on the newscast that commented, oh, those aren't real Mormons, they are real Mormons. All of these groups are real Mormons. Even anti-Mormon has the word Mormon in it, right?
I think Lindsay Hansen Park has it right when she says there's more than one way to Mormon.
That's it. I think that's it exactly.
I like that. And the thing is as my understanding as a kid was that, and this comes, I think, from uh Packer, right? Was that you could not, it was dishonest to look at the church through a secular lens. If you did not make room for the divine in the church, you were missing the message. But what ends up happening is a lot of us have to once you take a step back and you say, okay, I understand the religious claims of Mormonism, but I also understand that it's a cultural institution, and therefore there
Mhm.
has to be cultural influence. And you start looking at the church through the lens of where it was created, how what the situations were around its creation, what the social conditions were that influenced individual members, and where those social institutions tie into what was the predominant thought of those generations. All of a sudden, you get this image that not only the church, but the Book of Mormon itself is a very, very human institution. Now, the church does not want you to view the church as a human institution because once you do, it takes away that sense of divine. You've
Mhm.
demythologized it. And so people like members of my family will fight very hard if I try to address anything in a demythologized or take the divine element out of it and just say, let's look at this from a purely secular and historical context. What are the influences? That's why people try to justify polygamy by always appealing to people's spiritual confirmations about polygamy without actually looking at it in terms of historical or sociological um, interaction. Okay, I don't think that true Mormonism, ever deviates from the idea that a true Mormon is somebody who is responsive and committed to the prophet and engages actively in the ordinances of Mormon salvation theology. That will always be the standard for who is a true Mormon because those are the ones who have access to the temple. Those are the ones who are seen and rewarded with the knowledge of their continuation, their families. Those are the ones who get from the institution the subjective reward of righteousness. They view themselves as above others. And even you see this in some of Nelson's talks where he's like the Lord has a special kind of love for people who keep covenants.
Yeah.
And there's been several comments where they've inserted that the love that God has for covenant keepers is different, differentiated and better or deeper than those with everybody else. Now that offends
Yeah.
me. But for the institution and those who are loyal to the institution, that will always be the standard for orthodoxy. Anybody who takes a step back and they say, you know what, those temple ceremonies, there's no historical basis for them. And therefore, I don't actually need them. I understand why they exist and I understand the message, but they're not what they claim to be. Those people, that's the rest of the population. But I don't think, in terms of the institution's view, orthodoxy stays the way it is. For people who walk away and have a more nuanced view, I think they become accepting of everybody. I think it becomes a very big tent organization, and I think I think that's happening now because you look at those of us who have podcasted or done TikToks. Everybody's at different places, and
Mhm.
I've never had anybody write me to say, how dare you say this or
Yeah.
that. So
Really? Well, you're lucky. So,
so far,
and a lot of people are self-reported Mormons, if that makes sense. And there's such, like you said, a huge tent around that. Like I think of very faithful friends that I have who, in the bishopric, primary president, go to movies and dinner every Sunday, right? That's just
yeah.
part of it. They have made peace with that. They're fine. They do their callings and they do that. Now, when their child is dating someone, bringing a new person home, just happened recently, they were going, oh, we better find out if this person is okay that we want to go to brunch after church, or that we want to go to the movie. So they recognize there are different levels, and they're hoping that their child, who was raised the way they are, will find someone that's okay with that. So, but they're self-reporting themselves as they would call themselves traditional devout Mormons, which is so interesting. And I see this in most, 30th kind of people that say, you know what, I'm okay. I don't need to wear my garments all the time. I think they're just for the temple. I'm fine drinking coffee. I understand where the word of wisdom came from. This is what you were saying about temple ordinances. People have knowledge, they use it, they're okay with themselves. They're good with God on the kind of Mormon that they have decided to be, and yet they're still attending. And for now, there's like this uneasy alliance where the church is like, okay, we're probably not gonna come after you or double down. We're gonna just let you be. And that's kind of where we are right now. But it certainly does lead to a lot of confusion where people say Mormons don't have tattoos. Yes, they do. Of course they do now. Mormons don't wear crosses. Yes, they do. So there's all these, it's uncomfortable for a lot of people that were raised in a certain way, I think. But like you said, I think this is what they have to do. And most of us who are older, we probably feel like we're being gaslit all the time. The way we were raised, we're dinosaurs. It's archaic. It was very different. And what I hear a lot when I share my experiences of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, well, that was just your family and they got it wrong. It's so hard to explain. I wish I could transport people back to the
I get a
church of the
kick.
70s and 80s. They would be shocked. We're
I get
only
a kick.
talking about half of it. We can't even describe how it was, can we?
Yeah, I get a kick out of the people on TikTok who push back and they're like, "Well, you obviously you don't understand this, or it was never that way." And then
Exactly.
I write them back. I say, "Okay, how old are you?"
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't tell me how old they are, that means that
Yeah.
they're probably under 20.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so let me explain to you. I've been doing this since before you were born. You're old enough to be my kid.
Right.
And it's very hard to explain to somebody that the church has had to rebrand multiple times, and we're sitting
Mhm.
in the middle of that rebrand.
That's it.
And it's so wild because they don't see it.
Yeah.
But if you take a step back, like we have, they see it. And I have a family member. We were having a conversation a while back, and I can't remember what exactly we said, but I was saying something critical of Nelson, and they didn't fight me on it, but they made a comment about the new garments being bullshit. And I was
Really
like,
interesting.
interesting. Yeah. And this is
Everybody
somebody who
has
was
their
born in the night.
limit.
Yep. Somebody who's born. So I think those Orthodox people, they can see it. And I think the Orthodox people, I think a lot of them are offended by it. I think they're working through it, but their response is not to question the narrative. Their response is to appeal to the idea that in the last days, even the very elite shall be deceived.
Yes. And the wheats and the
And
tares. I hear that.
yeah,
I get
I
called
hear
that
that too.
all the time from some family members, oh,
Yep.
you're one of the tares, and it's like they baked in the justification for people that are going to fall away. You're going to hear uncomfortable things. And this, I'm more elected, more elite. So, but if you think about it, the church is very hardwired to pivot instantly. Look at the word Mormon, right? The traditional devout are conditioned to pivot on a dime. What was fine yesterday is not fine today. And interestingly, I don't know, you probably might have seen my short on this, but of course, Mormon was the big pet peeve of President Nelson. So what is the big pet peeve of President Oaks? And he's already apparently appeared at a sacrament meeting in the Lehigh area. And what has he told the young people? What is his advice? Take the sacrament with the right hand.
Are you kidding
I
me?
am not kidding. This is his pet peeve. Mormon, no more of that. Now it's sacrament with the right hand. With everything happening in the world and the challenges for young people, the thing that he's hammering on, and he's done this before over and over. He's given multiple talks. There's all kinds of things. So I think we're going to see more of this. But this is point of order. This is get ready to pivot. Sacrament right hand. It's pet peeves of old men, right? It's
Fascinating.
so interesting to watch. But the traditional devout, they were raised to just pivot on a dime and say, yes, I believe that. No, I believe this. Yes, I'll do this. All these other groups, they don't do that. They're not hardwired to do that. They're going to
Yeah.
think about it a little bit. They're going to make their own decision,
Question why?
have their own personal revelation, if that's what you call it. For me in my house, I'm going to drink coffee, wear my garments every once in a while, and attend my friend's same-sex wedding, and I'm still a Mormon. That's how it's going. So I love how you said big tent. It is, and we'll see if it continues to be a big tent or, or what they do. So
I
it's
hope
all about the
so.
membership numbers. So
So
anyway,
as we're on our way out of this, are you
yeah.
gonna watch? Do you watch Secret Lives of Mormon Wives?
I do for purely podcasting purposes. Well, no, I mean it's all in my
For
neighborhood.
science.
It's all in my neighborhood. One of them was okay. We had an area rep in my ward when my kids were middle teenagers, and one of them is his daughter-in-law.
Oh, really?
So yeah, I do watch,
Huh.
and everywhere they go is places I've been. Of course, maybe not where I've actually gone to dinner there at this amazing upscale restaurant, but just because it's so local to me, it's so interesting to watch.
My
So
my wife and I watched about 8 minutes of the
yeah, it's
first episode.
hard. Yeah.
And just the whole, because I remember when I was working with the church, I was in the office of a 70 named John Max Madsen, and we were having a conversation. This would have been 2000 or maybe 2006, okay? And he was telling me, because we were having this discussion about the moral problems in the church and pornography and stuff like that. And he was telling me about how they excommunicated 5 couples from a stake for wife
Mhm.
swapping
Oh yeah,
in
no.
the Lehigh area. That
Yeah, I
was
was gonna say it's either Draper or Lehigh.
yeah.
RFM always
Um,
teases me. He's like, "Don't you live there?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Why haven't you ever been invited?" I'm like, "I don't know. I kind of feel insulted."
I'm sure somebody you've ever had a conversation with is part of that group,
Oh
right?
no, I know,
It's
and
always the people
that's
you least expect.
yeah, no, and that's what when people say that is not reality, those are not Mormon women. I 100% can tell you that there are
Yeah.
maybe not the wife
Well,
swapping part, but just the
well,
way they are. There
we watched
are.
the first
Yeah.
5 minutes, and they were just talking, and the way it was cut, and she just came across as so immature.
Yeah,
And I was
they
watching
are all
this,
immature. They're under 30, all of them. I mean,
so
it's
annoying.
yeah, no, it's
So we
incredible. But yeah, more
we
this
turned it
is
off, and then I forgot it existed
yeah,
until now.
no, you have to keep watching. I'll catch you up if you want. But yeah, so that will have dropped by the time this airs. And it's just interesting. I just love to follow this where people say those aren't Mormons, but they were all raised
Yeah.
LDS and they all talk about those things, especially on Real Housewives, especially Heather Gay. You've got the other cast member who sent her son on a mission. There were a series of episodes and he came home early. I mean, the world is getting a
Really?
taste of this, watching this. So it's an
Huh.
important part of the conversation. It really is. And it's the Mormon moment. I swear, everywhere you look, there's somebody that's out there in the I mean, you probably don't know, but Taylor Frankie Paul, the main wife
Yeah.
swapper, she is now the Bachelorette. So there's that whole series. Yes, I
That's gonna be a
know.
very interesting
See,
season, isn't
I
it?
know.
Everybody can get a rose on that one.
I feel like you need to I don't know, sprain your ankle or something, Jim. So you're laid up in bed and you have nothing better to do than to watch all of these programs. But yeah, we're going to track all of it. And I just think it's fascinating. So I hope all of you have been commenting in the chat. I think hopefully the chat's going crazy because this is such an interesting topic. And just let us know what you think about these 4 categories. Does this resonate with you? Do you see yourself in these categories or maybe shifting between the categories like Jim describes? I mean, good heavens, I would love to go back in time and meet you, Jim, back in your day when you were blogging and
I
because I was always very
I
nuanced and agnostic. So I probably would have gone, oh my
I
God, get a load of that guy, right?
that
But here we are on a
the
podcast.
first of all, we would not have gotten along.
Yeah, we probably
Um,
wouldn't have. Yeah.
but I gave my friend my friend who comes from the very fundamentalist Baptist. I actually gave her a copy of something I wrote, and I said, okay, you need to read this. This was 20 years ago, and her response was just like, this is I don't even understand how this is the same person.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
know.
hard. It's hard to go back and read what you
It is.
wrote and then realize that that's the way you viewed even your loved ones.
Yeah.
And my wife and I have had this conversation where when we were in Utah last time, I had several family members on her side who were just kind of laughing at me because they're like, "Oh my gosh, you used to be so uptight." Like they didn't like to be around me because they couldn't, I was
Yeah.
so rigid and so
Yeah.
uptight and so absolutist. And it's really interesting how many relationships and how many very beautiful dynamics you could have with people that get torpedoed because you walk into every single room with this filter of who is acceptable and who is unacceptable, and you won't engage past a certain level. So
No,
you never actually know what makes why people feel the way they feel. You don't know what the experiences they've had. But in Mormonism, you're often programmed to discount their experience if it is critical of something that you've been taught as absolute
exactly.
truth.
Yeah.
And that's my final thought on this because I mean that applies to so much and it applies to a lot of what we've got here.
It does. I know. Being more authentic on the other side of everything, it's one of the amazing parts of it, you know.
Mhm.
And reconnecting with people that you can now be authentic with. I mean, that
Yes.
happens when you find people, you know. I always tell the story of how I have, you know, a cousin. I didn't know anybody else in my family, extended family was out. I have, you know, dozens and dozens of cousins, aunts and uncles, and I happened on an online forum kind of a thing, post-Mormony. I'm like, is that my cousin? I couldn't believe it. And it was. And we started chatting on the side. And now we have this, you know, before we had this kind of professional cousiny relationship, you know, he's about 10 years younger than I am. Now we're like, I mean,
Yeah.
completely authentic. And we're like, oh my gosh, you
Lots of
too,
commonality.
you know, you too. It's just, it's amazing. It can be amazing. So, well, this has been amazing, wonderful. We'll keep tracking it. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you would like to be made aware of when the new episodes come out, you can hit the notification bell. If you would like to make a donation to Mormonish Podcast, it is the end of the year. If you're looking for a place to make a donation, we are here. We're a 501c3. So you can find links in the show notes for that. We also have links to our merch store. And again, thank you, Unoriginal Jim. I wish you weren't calling yourself unoriginal because you're one of the most original people that I know. And please,
But am I
right before
really?
we go, tell us where we can find you and your content. Jim does incredible TikToks and commentary. Let us know where we can find you so that we
Yeah.
can get
So
more
if you
Jim.
if you go to TikTok, it's just unoriginal Jim. And what I do on there is I go through and I like to take a look at why things what the impacts and implications are on things. And so I'll take a subject and then go through, what does this mean? Why do people believe it? What's the outcome? I recently did a 30-minute breakdown on why politicians investigating chemtrails is dangerous, why it's stupid.
Interesting.
And then I have another one going through what we talked about was the conflation of ex-Mormon and anti-Mormon and
Mm-hmm.
how that destroys relationships. So each one of my TikToks is between about nine. They use about 10 minutes long, sometimes longer. But my goal is to go through issues that strike me as important and not just talk about them on a superficial level, but try to give people a reasoned analysis on as to why something exists or what the outcomes and impacts could be.
Yeah.
So a lot about religion. Everything's tied back to my personal experience. And I try not to be condescending. I try not to be intentionally antagonistic. I
Yeah.
try to drive everything from a position of this is what I experienced, this is what
Right.
I
This is
feel,
me. Yep.
and this is what our interactions are like because of it. So
Mhm.
unoriginal Jim on TikTok.
No, that's great. And I always encourage you, I hope you always will, on our Mormonish Facebook page, just post all your stuff there because your our stuff is very aligned and it intersects and it overlaps a lot. And so that would be a good place for people to be able to go to find you too if they're
Yep,
not
I'll
able
post
to
it there.
access you on TikTok. So look for Unoriginal Jim on TikTok too. And
Cool.
thank you again for co-hosting. And I'm sure we'll do
Anytime.
something again soon. There's always a topic where I like, I gotta call Jim. So
Cool.
we'll see everybody next time on Mormonish. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.